Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Soul Chess in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Chapter 146, Cornelia's Determination. May 2009 ATB. Cornelia had spent the last several months tirelessly trying to get to the source of the Inked Alliance. She had been tirelessly glancing over the files Marianne had given her, and she had even received several emails from Meredith regarding information she remembered she had written in some of her own reports. Cornelia had talked to Darlton directly about what he knew and even asked her father a few questions about the alliance itself. The total progress Cornelia had made from all this, none at all. Even with all the information and resources at her disposal, Cornelia was no closer to getting to the bottom of the Inked Alliance. She had managed to locate several hideouts using deductive map skills and guesswork, but every single time the captured terrorists kept their mouths closed. One thing Cornelia did find, though she had long since agreed with the speculation before finding evidence, was that Meredith was right about the paying the terrorists idea. It seemed that the Inked Alliance, called so because of the bizarre tattoos they wore somewhere on their body, were not a founded group and, in fact, a bunch of anti-Britannians being paid by some shadowy, powerful figure, to terrorize the nation. To what end, though? Cornelia constantly asked herself. She had yet to get any lead on the Alliance's goals, and she had yet to get any lead on their funder too. Cornelia had made a list of suspects. Whoever was pulling the strings had a vast knowledge of Britannia's layouts and knew some military tactics. They had to be wealthy, and they had to be so high up in power that no one could touch them. Cornelia's list of suspects was not perfect, though. There were several people she didn't want to suspect, crossing them off on principle. However, if she had life experiences like Meredith, she wouldn't be so quick to cross suspects off the list. Cornelia's suspect list mainly consisted of Britannia's enemies and honorary Brightonians. Her biggest list of suspects consisted of people from the EU. Cornelia was considering the possibility that damage to their facility was a means of throwing an investigation off. She suspected the Chinese Federation might be involved in some way too, or instead, but the EU was her primary focus. If she'd really been thinking, though, she'd know that the EU was of lesser suspect since their government was all about equality in both race and sex. Cornelia just couldn't figure this conundrum out. Cornelia also hadn't let Yuffie out of her sight since the incident, unless Cornelia was on the job and or Yuffie was under the watchful eye of armed men under Cornelia's employ. Her visits to the Ares Palace became less frequent as her investigation furthered. As she sat at her desk, rubbing the eraser of the pencil she was holding through her lavender hair, she wondered if she was going to get anywhere with her investigation when there was a knock on her door. She left her study to go answer it. She was surprised to see that Darlton had taken a visit to her house. General, Cornelia saluted immediately. What can I do for you? Darlton gave her the at ease gesture. General-in-Chief Albert Q. Anardas has asked that your investigation be suspended, Colonel, Darlton told her. Cornelia became snappy instantly. Suspended? I'm investigating terrorists here. Perhaps you understand when you have read this. Darlton handed Cornelia a letter. She read it over, mumbling the words out loud. Dear Bitchly Britannia, if you continue to muddle in our affairs, we will continue to target your friends and your family. We will. She shook her head and tore the letter away from her face without bothering to finish it. She understood what it was for the garbage she knew it to be. A threatening letter demanding that she back off. You think I'm going to chicken out because of a threatening letter? The General-in-Chief is offering you an additional 400 troops and is asking that all your files be transferred to him, and the investigation will be monitored by Black Ops from here on out. Just like Meredith. Cornelia recognized the signs. She still didn't like this one bit. She now had a connection. She absolutely had to keep investigating. She began her rebuttal. This is my family that's in danger. She stamped her foot. I have the right to. You have the right to life, Colonel, Darlton cut her off, calmly. Now Cornelia was livid. She was just supposed to sit back and let the General-in-Chief sit on this. That was not happening. This letter was a lead, and Cornelia had a right mind to track it down. The terrorists would strike again by the time she found someone else to pass the investigation on to. No, better to say Britannia would be torn asunder first. Anardas would just sit on his ass and do nothing while these bastards ran amok. Cornelia would have none of it. This is absolute bullshit military politics. This is my family and my investigation. Cornelia shouted, pointing at herself. Why the fuck is the General-in-Chief forcing me to do this? Here's what I think of the letter and the General's offer. Cornelia prepared to tear the letter. You're out of line, Colonel. Darlton bellowed. Cornelia stopped her actions. It was the first time Darlton had ever yelled at her like that. He was always such a calm man, much like she was a calm young woman. She submitted immediately, shaken by Darlton's commanding voice. She remembered her place. Sir, yes sir. I apologize, sir. I was out of line, sir. Her heart was still pounding from being yelled at. Good, Darlton spoke punctually, I want those files transferred immediately. I should reprimand you for talking back to me like that, but you're a good soldier and it's your first offense. I'm going to let you off with a warning. Do not let my kindness seem like foolery. Sir, yes, sir. Cornelia was very sorry for her mouth earlier. Darlton then excused himself, and when Cornelia was certain he had left the grounds, she went over to her desk and computer in the study and prepared to transfer her files. As she began though, she stopped. She looked around herself to make sure no one was watching her. Then, she shut the door to the study, locked it, and got set down to work making backup copies of all of her files, both written and electronic, of the Inked Alliance, and then transferred the originals to the General-in-Chief. As she prepared to drive down to base to transfer the written files only, one thought went through Cornelia's mind about this decision: sometimes you just have to do what's right. 2 weeks later. Ares Palace. Lelich and Cornelia were playing chess and holding a casual conversation while doing so. So I heard your investigation was shut down. Suspended, Cornelia corrected, not shut down. It's the military. You and I both know that's it, Lelich stated. Check, by the way. That's what I want them to think, Cornelia said with a smile. Lelich was confused. Cornelia looked around and then said lowly, can you keep a secret? Lelich looked offended as if to say, do you have to ask? Right, sorry, forgot who I was talking to, Cornelia chuckled and then told him, I'm still carrying out my investigation in secret. I made backup copies of all of my files. What? But isn't that illegal? You're gonna get in a lot of trouble. Is this worth risking your job over? You like being in the military. Lelich was concerned for his big sister. Cornelia found such great pride in being a soldier. Lelich would hate to see his big sister collapse into despair. Yes, he treated her roughly, but she was still his older sister. Cornelia meant a lot to him. If only he knew how little he would come to care. Because, Lelich, sometimes you just need to go with your gut and do what's right, she glared. And I will stop at nothing to get justice for Yuffie, she slammed her queen down on the board. Checkmate. She got up and left the room. Hey. Lelich complained as the colonel got up to leave the room. 2 weeks later. Cornelia got up that morning feeling worse than the morning after a jet-lag shore leave. Besides the woozy headache, she had abdominal cramps. Oh wonderful, she grit her teeth, that time of the month I see. She reached over to her night table for the phone. She was not going to Ares Palace on her period. As Yuffie and the servants tended to Cornelia's needs with the second princess lying in bed all day with ice cream and television, she thought to herself, I can't imagine anyone having a worse day than this. Soul Society. Kyan sneezed randomly within his own home as he stood in front of the kitchen helping Rukia, Ganju, and the servants cook. Every month he and the Sheba Manor had to hide in terror or be prepared to cower like baby puppies, because once a month a monster got loose in the Sheba Manor and everyone needed to pull together to help soothe the savage beast. Kia-yin. A roar from upstairs sounded. Ganju wiped his brow in thanks that he wasn't the one being called for. You'd better go check up on her, Rukia said to her husband. Why yeah, Kyan said with sweat dripping down his face and hesitantly made his way upstairs where his sister's bedroom was. He poked his head in to see the snarling beast that was his sister using one servant as a cushion and yet another as a footrest. Hey sis, he gulped, need something. How much longer do I have to wait for my breakfast? It's nearly ready, Kyan said with a kind smile. I'll call you when it's finished, honest. You'd better. Also tell Ganja to fetch me a copy of the newsprint and tell Rukia to get the mail, and tell them to be quick about it. Get me a collapsible table. Why yes sis, understood sis, not a problem sis, Kyan sweated. Good. Leave. Yeah. No problem. Kyan said and slammed the door behind him like he'd just trapped a dragon inside the room. He wiped his brow with the back of his arm as he let out a deep breath. Kyan could only imagine that if his sister was this monstrous, how bad Anohana could possibly be on her monthly days. A shiver of terror ran down Kyan's spine. He didn't even want to think of what that was like. July 2009 ATB. The temperature was blistering today. Cornelia was sweltering in the heat as she stood guard outside the Ares Palace, or rather that's how she would be if Clovis wasn't hosting a pool party for her and select few other siblings. Cornelia and Yuffie had been invited, plus Marianne and the kids. Cornelia was dressed in a maroon bikini, much to her chagrin. She would have preferred a one-piece, but she couldn't find one in her cup size. Yuffie was in a light blue one-piece. Lelich was dressed in black swim trunks. Nunnally was in a two-piece pink swimsuit with white spots. Cornelia's face flushed when she saw Marianne's rather revealing G-string orange bikini. She had asked Marianne, back at the palace, if she was insistent on wearing it because of how revealing it made her look and what people might say if an empress wore something like that, but Marianne felt that since this was a private party that there was no harm and that her beauty should be allowed to be shown every once in a while. Schneeisel was there too, dressed in blue swim trunks with a white stripe along the outside of his right leg. Cornelia flushed considerably when she got an eyeful of him without a shirt on. Nonette had managed to show up as well, dressed in a one-piece, yellow swimsuit that bound together her cleavage with strings, but had an incredibly deep V-cut down to the navel. Much unlike if Cornelia was wearing something so revealing, Nonette seemed rather content in her swimsuit. Guinevere was also there, unfortunately, dressed in a lilac bikini. Cornelia wasn't going to say anything, but for Marianne it was dazzling, sexy, and slightly arousing. When her sister did it, it was just shameless. This was, of course, just Cornelia's opinion. However, as a big shock, it seemed that Clovis was on friendly terms with Meredith, for she was also in attendance wearing a black one-piece swimsuit. If Darlton and his sons were around, Cornelia felt she might joke that the gang was all here. Cornelia approached Meredith when she arrived and saluted to the Viceroy. "Ah, Cornelia, good to see you." "Same to you, Viceroy, what are you doing here?" Clovis, dressed in a pink wife beater with purple trunks with green clovers on them, was quick to explain, "I know the Viceroy through her niece, her two daughters and second cousin once removed. Unfortunately they seemed to be busy. Originally, I wasn't going to show up at all," Meredith stated, and then looked at Cornelia, "but when I heard you were showing up, I figured there could be no harm. Even the most methodical leaders need a day off every now and again." "Clovis," she turned to look at him, "would you give us some time? Perhaps have some of the servants fetch us some appetizers." "Yes, right away, Viceroy." "Once again allow me to say it is very nice to have you here." Clovis bowed and left the area. "This is about the Inked Alliance, isn't it?" Cornelia asked. "Indeed," Meredith answered, "I heard what happened." Cornelia looked side to side and then whispered, holding her hand up by her face, "I'm still carrying it out in secret." "I figured you might," Meredith said in normal volume. "Although I must say, given the responsibility, I'm surprised you even decided to take a day off. Based on my findings, the Alliance would be fools to attack Clovis Mansion in broad daylight. He has all of his guards stationed here today to ensure that that doesn't happen. Also, if they do attack here, it's because they know that I'm here, and that will considerably lower my list of suspects." "And if they attack the mansion while you're out?" Meredith questioned. "I have 49% of my men stationed at my place and 50% at the Ares Palace. The rest of my men are free to do as they like. I've earned the right to a break, and I'll be damned if they take it away from me," Cornelia said with a small grin. "And what happens if you take them on if they do attack here?" Meredith quizzed. "Plain view doctrine," Cornelia answered, "I'm within my right to go after them and draft a report. I just can't investigate, doesn't mean I can't fight." Meredith smiled proudly, "I take back what I said in Area 9. Marianne was right to put you in charge of this. Now, if you'll excuse me. Meredith went to go mingle with Marianne. The two were old friends and had a lot of catching up to do. As Cornelia approached the same area though, she noticed that Nunnally appeared to be talking to a woman lounged by the pool, a woman not wearing swimwear. Nunnally was over by the edge of the pool wearing her floatas as she talked away with this stranger. Schneeisel was in the pool lounging on an inflatable chair with a glass of lemonade gripped in his fingers. Guinevere was sunbathing, wearing shades and holding a sun-tanning mirror not far from the area of interest. Cornelia felt she needed to investigate. Cornelia, is something troubling you? Clovis asked her, coming up to her. Who's that girl talking to Nunnally? Cornelia asked. What girl? Clovis asked. Cornelia was puzzled. She looked at Clovis with a furrowed brow. Oh, is this some kind of new game? No, it's nothing. Cornelia shook her head, never mind. She stared at the woman Nunnally was talking to. The woman had to be around Marianne and Nonette's age, maybe a few years younger. She studied the young woman carefully and then glanced over to Meredith. The resemblance was uncanny even from this distance. Clovis. Cornelia spoke up again. Yes, big sister. Clovis was halfway down the grassy slope towards the others, but bounded right back to the second princess as she called for him. Was there any particular reason you decided to throw this party? What do you mean? Thought so. Cornelia's intuition was right. She could tell from Clovis stuttering. Call it woman's intuition, she winked at her younger half-brother. Clovis sighed and scratched his head as he looked up and to the right. I can't lie to you, can I? That's some sharp intuition you have. He looked around and then spoke lowly to Cornelia. You know me, I chase skirts and most of the time I succeed. Yes, why does that not surprise me? Cornelia shook her head comically. Continue, Clovis, she sighed. Well, one of my recent lovers was the Viceroy's youngest, Elysium. And well, you know I'm not 18 yet and Elysium is 24. We were holding our relationship in secret until I came of age, but well. So it was an accident? Cornelia asked. Clovis sighed. Elysium was adventurous, much like her mother at her age. Sometimes she would come to the manor in the middle of the night, just to see me. And well, to put it bluntly, one of my guards got a little trigger happy. So she was shot and killed, mistaken for a common thief. Cornelia understood why she didn't just use the main entrance. She was trying to protect hers and Clovis' reputation. The man who shot her is already on death row. I've apologized to the Viceroy frequently. I didn't want to say anything until towards the end, because everyone is having such a good time, so I just made it seem like I was having a random party. So that's why the Viceroy came. She knows why you're doing this. Cornelia looked to where Meredith was now playing chess against Lelich, while Nonette and Marianne watched. She does. Now, if you'll excuse me. I'm going to go get a cheese plate for my honored guest. As the tale settled into Cornelia's mind, suddenly it hit her as to the problem before her eyes. Nunnally was talking as in having a full conversation with a dead spirit, something Cornelia thought only she was capable of. As she pondered what to do, she decided she didn't want to confront Nunnally over this. However, she wondered if it was a good idea to even tell Nunnally what she was dabbling in. Cornelia, she's 6. You didn't understand you were talking to the dead until you were 8, the second princess reminded herself. So then, where to proceed from here? Cornelia racked her brain for an idea until she saw the servant with the cheese tray Clovis had asked for. She approached the nearest, hands-free servant and asked nicely, "Pardon me, sir, but could you whip up some sweet potato-type snacks for us?" "Not a problem, Your Highness. I'll get on it right away." Cornelia smiled as he walked away. Sweet potatoes had always been Lelich and Nunnally's favorite healthy snack. That would get Nunnally away from the spirit and Cornelia could talk to her herself. Schneeisel was coming out of the pool and heading to have some of the exotic cheeses Clovis had brought out. Cornelia figured she might partake, and as she approached she noticed that Meredith and Lelich's game was coming to an end. "Checkmate," Lelich said, finishing the game. "Oh my," Marianne said, looking at the board in awe. She then looked at Meredith. "Mara, you didn't go easy on him, did you?" "Why would I?" Meredith was never one to go easy on anything. Have you forgotten who you're talking to, Mari? Cornelia smiled at the fact that both women had nicknames for each other despite being more than 2 decades apart. Cornelia looked at Nonette. What? The blonde asked. Oh, nothing, nothing, Cornelia giggled, nah. Nonette smiled goofily, realizing why Cornelia had called her that just now. Cornelia, you should try some of this cheese. It's heavenly, Schneeisel advertised. Don't mind if I do, Cornelia said and plucked a yellow rectangle off the plate. Ah, I had that imported over here from Germany, a fine choice. That's my son, Gabriel, his mother, praised. One day he'll have his own establishment to show all kinds of things in their true art form. Let me know when he understands the art of chess, Lelich insulted. Marianne slapped him lightly upside the back of the head. It wasn't long before the servant with the sweet potatoes Cornelia had asked for came by. The scent of it drew Nunnally to the group like flies to a light bulb. Cornelia then slipped away from her family and made her way to the side of the pool and sat down next to Elysium's spirit. Your mother's here. Elysium was yanked from her thoughts, sat up and exclaimed. You can see me? You're lucky Nunnally is out of earshot, but yes, I can. Elysium sat up and scrunched her knees up by her chest. Cornelia then dove into the water and started doing the backstroke as she talked to Elysium as she swam up and down the length of the pool. How come you haven't tried to reach out towards the Viceroy, your mother? It's not like she can see me. Elysium stretched out her legs, showing off that she had one really long chain of fate. Cornelia didn't know how long because it was going in through the hedge maze and out of sight. I already tried using the phone at home. Why are you here? I don't want to leave. I want to be with Clovis, Elysium said solemnly. Cornelia kicked her legs and she drifted headfirst towards Elysium. You know I was just talking to Clovis and he's hosting this party for you. He is. Cornelia smiled. You meant more to him than it seems you think. You should be patient. If there is another side, Clovis will come. You're in his thoughts, Elysium. Thank you, goddess of victory. Cornelia chuckled, you don't have to thank me. You're not the first of your kind I've dealt with and I'm sure you won't be the last. Elysium smiled and then faded away, her Rishi dispersed and began to enter the Danga precipice world where it would later reform in the Soul Society, not that Cornelia knew those last 2 parts. Satisfied with her work, Cornelia went over to where everyone was sitting around and talking. Nunnally, who were you talking to earlier? I saw you chatting away at the air, Nonette said to her. I was talking to this really nice lady. She looked a lot like Viceroy Myrdia. She said her name was Elysium. Clovis nearly choked on the food in his mouth. Meredith entered a coughing fit as her drink went down the wrong way. Elysium, isn't that? Guinevere cut Schneeisel off. Absurd, Elysium Myrdia is dead. I think it's cute that Nunnally has herself an imaginary friend, Marianne spoke up. You're all quick to jump to the conclusion that it's the same Elysium. But mommy, it was her. I just know it. Sometimes I feel like I'm really communicating with spirits. If that's what she believes then that's what she must be doing, Lelich supported his sister. It didn't matter if he thought the idea was rubbish or not. Lelich always supported Nunnally. I think it's entirely possible she may have been communicating with the spirit of Elysium Myrdia, Cornelia spoke up as she poured herself a drink. Maybe they really are out there, the spirits of the deeply departed, looking for us, wanting to make sure we're okay before moving on. Maybe they can't always talk to who they want though, and so have to communicate with only those who are high believers of the supernatural, like Nunnally. That's rubbish, Guinevere turned the page of her magazine. I didn't know you were so spiritual of a person, Cornelia, Clovis said to her. Ah, that reminds me. Cornelia, didn't you go through a phase like this when you were Nunnally's age? It's not a phase, Cornelia said, sheepishly unwilling to admit that she still had imaginary friends. I think it's a good thing for a woman to be spiritually attuned, Schneeisel raised his glass, it's a sign of a certain type of grace, in my opinion. Personally, I'd rather deal in facts, Meredith said as she came out of her coughing fit. Me too, but I don't think there's any problem in speculating what might be, especially for something so beyond human understanding. So does that mean you believe in ghosts? Lelich asked. Yes, I do believe in ghosts, Lelich. Both the good and the bad kind. Yeah, and the bad kind sneak up on bad little boys and girls and then they grab them. Nonet exclaimed, grasping Lelich's shoulders, causing him to jump. Marianne slapped the Knight of Nine upside the head for scaring her son. Before this interesting conversation could continue though, a servant came out with the telephone. Miss Lee Britannia, phone call for you. For me. Cornelia was confused. It's His Majesty himself. He wants to talk to you, the servant said, handing her the phone. His Majesty? No one batted an eyelash when Cornelia seemed like she couldn't get inside fast enough. A call from His Majesty was highly irregular. One did not simply ignore it and finish what they were doing before answering it. If the Emperor took time to personally call you, you answered the phone. Still, it was odd that he wanted to speak with Cornelia. He always held his children at a distance. Hello? Cornelia asked when she answered the phone to make sure Charles was still there once she was certain no one was around in the part of the house she was standing in. I heard your investigation had been suspended, Charles said to her. Old news, what of it, Your Majesty? Cornelia retorted. Charles made a gruff sound on the other end of the line. I suppose it is, but I'm only able to contact with you about the situation now. What is there to talk about though, Your Highness? I've lost all rights to the investigation. Unless you're about to tell me I'm back on or that you'll force the General-in-Chief to cow to your will, which I highly doubt, what's there to talk about? Cornelia did not mean to be rude to her father and knew he deserved more respect that she was giving, but losing her investigation was a sore spot that she did not wish to talk about. Though now she at least knew that Charles wished to speak with her professionally rather than this being a social call. Still, she was only a colonel. It was odd for him to choose to speak with her rather than someone more high up, like Darlton. She would come to understand her father's reasons in time though. Cornelia, though we do not spend much time together, I'd like to think I know you well enough that you're probably still thinking about the terrorists or even investigating it in secret, and I just wanted to tell you that, to help you, that I believe that there is a traitor within the military. What good does that information do me? Cornelia asked. I have no investigative power. Couldn't you just give order for this person to be locked up, Your Majesty? Let us just say that locking this person up without proof would be difficult, given public opinion and lack of solid evidence. This is a domestic affair, Cornelia. We don't have to tread carefully in foreign affairs, but our own nation must see me, and the royal family, in the highest regard. I know you'll discover the truth, Cornelia. I want this traitor put down. But why do you suspect this person? Who is it, Your Majesty? I am not at liberty to give you that information under the circumstances, but I'm sure you'll figure it out. You're a smart girl, always have been. You are one of the brightest children I can be proud to call myself the father of. I believe in you, Cornelia. However, as to why I suspect this person, it is because I believe that a world based on lies and deceit is a world of ruin. Good luck, Cornelia, and give your sister my regards. Charles then hung up. Cornelia then hung up the phone herself. If His Majesty believes in me, then I had a better chance than I did before. I will expose the truth behind the Inked Alliance. September 2009 ATB. With her father's tip-off, Cornelia worked to whittle down her list of suspects. She figured that the only people who could be behind the operation were wealthy soldiers that were above Meredith's rank and had been in the army longer than her. That didn't leave her with a very large list, especially since the list had to cut all of the women, since the Inked Alliance was apparently all male. Still, things were falling into place. If there was a traitor paying these terrorists to commit to these actions, it would explain why these terrorists had worse aim than a prepubescent camper's first time at archery. It meant that whoever was paying these terrorists wanted them to die, but held his employees out on a very loose leash. The real question was, why do it at all? What was the point? Certainly the man paying these men didn't want to see Britannia ripped asunder, or did he? Her father called the man a traitor. If that was the case, why didn't the ringleader just join the EU? It didn't make any sense to her. Of course, what Cornelia didn't understand, since she was not savvy with politics, is that a traitor, if they were high up, could do more damage from within than outside, though she'd come to understand such things with age and experience. Cornelia had all of the men of lieutenant general, equal rank of the other military branches, and above, on her list, with one exception, General Darlton. If Darlton was really the mastermind behind any of this, he would have swiped Lelich, Yuffie, and Nunnally when Cornelia gave him the opportunity. But beyond that, Darlton was a family man and he had time and again proven his loyalty to the Emperor. The people higher on Cornelia's suspect list were ones of questionable loyalty, varying levels of low public relations and reputations within the military itself for being even more ruthless in command than Meredith. Strangely enough, while it made sense, Cornelia was not ready to throw General-in-Chief Albert Q. Anardas at the top of the list. Yes, he was the most obvious to suspect since he could throw everything under the bridge, and it would explain why he was sitting on his hands with these men and giving things to Special Ops, but the General-in-Chief was over 60 and still a strong soldier. He also had made many mistakes and enemies in his lifespan and could be suffering blackmail. Not to mention that it would take more evidence to prove that it was him. Anardas was still on Cornelia's suspect list, but she wasn't going to jump to the conclusion that, just because he was of the highest authority, that he had to be the mastermind. Instead, she'd take things one by one, starting with the easiest to investigate and move on to the hardest. She had started with a list of well over 400 suspects when she first got the tip-off from Charles, and after deductive reasoning and playing the tip against her other evidence, she'd gotten the list down to less than a tenth of that, specifically, 36. Right now, she was stuck though, and whenever Cornelia was stuck, she would turn on the TV and browse news channels or surf the internet for news pertaining to the military. Sometimes, even if it was small, she could follow on some sort of lead. And today was no different. Cornelia got herself a can of Pepsi, sat down in front of the large screen TV in the living room, cracked the top and turned to the first news station her house got. Right away there was something. Top story today. Brigadier General Betty Nova was found murdered today in her rented apartment in Pendragon. Cornelia choked on her drink as she heard this and wound up coughing it all over the coffee table. She grabbed a cloth to clean up her mouth and the table and listened in further as she turned up the volume. The sub-viceroy of Area 9 was sent to the mainland recently on a top-secret mission at the viceroy's request. She was supposed to return to Area 9 early this morning before sunrise, but when her plane did not land, investigators found her dead inside her apartment. Details on the death are classified except to military personnel and the police on a need-to-know basis. Cornelia shut off the television and immediately called up the Area 9 Viceroy's office. "Please connect me to the Viceroy's office. I understand she's busy, but tell her Colonel Lee Britannia is on the other line." It didn't take long for Meredith to pick up the moment she knew it was Cornelia asking for her time. "I take it you've heard." "I have." Cornelia was glad to know Meredith was expecting her to call. It saved her time to explain. "I need permission to get details. Where was her body taken, and can you get me clearance to speak to the police in charge of her homicide? It will be a hassle from all the way out here, but I can do my best to pull those strings. Betty was the best assistant I ever had." "Was her special assignment related to my case?" Cornelia asked. "I won't lie to you about something so dire, so I'm going to ask you to go on faith when I say that it is completely unrelated to the Alliance. I would tell you if it was. As it is not in a matter of a more personal nature, and also classified, I cannot bring myself to tell you anything without violating protocol." "Understood," Cornelia responded, "then just getting the details on Brigadier General Nova's death will be enough." "Understood. Good luck, Colonel." "Thank you." 2 weeks later. Clearance took a while for Cornelia to finally have permission to get the general info surrounding Betty Nova's death. The important thing was now to piece together what she had with what she knew. Meredith seemed convinced that it could connect to the Inked Alliance, which meant that the Alliance still resented Meredith, which meant that Cornelia had to take these guys down because if Meredith was still being targeted then Marianne might be too. This was, of course, assuming Nova's death had anything to do with the Alliance. Meredith had said that her mission was not Inked Alliance related, but that didn't mean she wasn't killed by them. And it just so happened that days before her death that Betty Nova was getting chummy with a lieutenant general that just so happened to be on Cornelia's list, Marshall Evans. Evans reminded Cornelia a bit about Clovis in that he was always looking for companionship. The difference between Evans and Clovis though was that while Clovis was a romantic, Evans was a man-whore. Evans was 3 years Meredith's senior, but he looked 10 years younger. Meredith could easily pass for 44, despite being 56, the way she kept herself. Marshall looked 34 despite being 58. Cornelia now had herself a puzzle though. How could she investigate Evans without being overt about it? Cornelia began typing furiously away into a search engine, digging up information on Evans as best she could only to turn up empty. Okay, so conventional research is out the window. Cornelia spun her swivel chair around and pondered what her next move should be. She was too young to ingratiate herself to Evans, and even if she did she wouldn't stoop that low. Cornelia was tempted to use her older sister, but Guinevere was only 23. Nonette was 28. While Meredith was old enough, she had already taken a vacation day only a few months ago, so that was out of the question. A thought struck Cornelia and she went back to typing. She looked up information on the Major General and found what she was looking for. Elysium was Meredith's younger daughter. She had an older daughter, but the age still didn't reach what Cornelia needed. However, that's when Cornelia saw a glimmer of hope. Meredith's niece, Julia, was 35. Perfect, now I just need an opportunity. She called up Meredith and eventually got her on the phone. Make this quick, Colonel. Just because you need my help doesn't mean you can drag me away from my responsibilities on your whim. I understand that, ma'am, and I only need a short moment of your time. Your niece, Julia, how badly does she want revenge for her mother? Hold please, Meredith said. On the other end she put Cornelia on hold and dialed for her secretary. Elisa, please hold all other calls for a while. Yes, Viceroy Myrdia. Meredith returned to speaking with Cornelia. I'm listening. I think I have an idea who might be leading the alliance, but I need Julia's cooperation. I know you've been the only family she has had since her mother died and her father walked out on her, just like your husband did to you and your girls. And so I ask, would she be willing to cooperate in a military operation? She might be, but you'd have to ask her. I'd tell you speak to Darlton since he's in closer proximity to you, but I understand phoning me since you don't want to tip the man off that you're still doing this. If anything goes amiss I'll take responsibility. That's... Cornelia swallowed, a big risk. It will be worth it if you think you can take down the ringleader of these cockroaches. I'll give you my niece's number and address. Do know that should something happen to her I am holding you responsible. Though on the phone Cornelia saluted to Meredith, I swear on my honor, nothing will happen to her. I wouldn't want Euphemia risked this way if you were asking the same. I appreciate that, Cornelia. Here's what you need to know. October 2009 ATB. Cornelia had worked for 3 weeks to get Julia ready for what she would need the woman for. At the same time, Cornelia had invited Lieutenant General out to lunch, pretending to thank him for a service he had done recently, acting as if it mattered. Evans was too proud of himself to suspect Cornelia was up to anything, not to mention she had been taken off the investigation, so he believed she wouldn't be that stupid. However, Cornelia was meeting Evans with Julia in tow, and when she introduced them, Evans became attracted to the blonde woman. Oh, well. Cornelia acted, don't I feel like a third wheel? Why don't you excuse me? Cornelia walked away and made her way to her parked car several blocks down and drove it up to parallel park it across from the restaurant. She listened in on the conversation using a radio transmitter, making sure to get the information she needed. And how do you know the colonel? Marshall asked Julia. My aunt used to command her. Surely the name Meredith Myrdia needs no introduction. Ah, Miss Meredith, such a fine woman she is, and a loving mother at that, but I didn't know her sister had reared such a fine daughter of her own. Oh stop, Julia acted in how she had been coordinated by Cornelia, you're embarrassing me. Time passed before another crucial question was asked. So do you come here often, Lieutenant General? It's one of my favorite dining places. I first met Brigadier General Nova here before she... Yes, the military lost a good soldier, Julia said to Marshall. Did you see her, the day before she died? It had only been just a few hours before she was attacked. Such a sad thing too. She was so happy that she had completed her mission because she was supposed to get promoted for a job well done. Cornelia now was realizing why Nova had been killed. She was increasing in rank. The Inked Alliance wanted to keep her down. Meredith had been forever grounded as a major general, and Nova not only had a longer life to live at the age of 38, but she also was not bound to stop rising. That's why the Alliance took her down, their sexist fears. Marshall was going down. Cornelia had what she needed from Julia. The rest was on her. She continued to monitor the situation until the two Brightonians parted ways and Cornelia let Julia know she had what she needed. The Major General's niece didn't feel like she had done anything of importance, but Cornelia told her that she was more helpful than she cared to realize. November 2009 ATB. Cornelia was staked outside the Evans estate with coffee and energy bars, as well as being armed with her bayonet shotgun and a handgun with several extra cartridges for it. Some had Sakuradite ammo, some didn't. Cornelia had been up to this stakeout for 17 nights straight now. She'd arrive at 10 p.m. and stay until Marshall was fast asleep, hoping to catch a glimpse of what she needed, but so far no luck. As she looked into the window of the master bedroom, she whispered to herself, "Come on, let's see that tattoo." Tattoo. Yeah, I think. Cornelia turned her head to the side to see Nonette crouched down next to her. In a loud whisper, almost freaking out, Cornelia said to her friend, "What the hell are you doing here?" "Oh, I saw you come up here from the market district and I followed you. I was in the mood for an evening stroll," Nonette answered. "Shhhhhh." Cornelia put her finger up to her lips. "Okay," Nonette said in a whisper and covered her mouth with her hands only to uncover them and ask, "Why are we sneaking around and being quiet? Are you peeping?" "Please," Cornelia scoffed the notion, "just stay quiet and let me watch. I'm trying to do important investigative work." Just as the second princess finished saying that, Marshall stood in front of the window to his bedroom and removed his shirt, exposing all of his muscle mass. It was nothing Cornelia hadn't seen before, but this time she saw him scratch his lower left back like it itched. Then she saw him peel away fake skin and go over somewhere probably to relieve the itch, but that didn't matter because for a split second Cornelia saw exactly what she needed to see, the Inked Alliance tattoo. "Bingo!" Cornelia exclaimed to herself. She tossed the binoculars to Nonette and ran from her hiding place in the bushes. "Ah, wait. Nellie!" Nonette called after her, but Cornelia was already on the move. She leapt into the backyard of the Lieutenant General and dropped flat onto the grass. Two security cameras panned the ground along the floor, same issue and reach as the one at the Lee Britannia Manor and the Ares Palace. Cornelia waited for the cameras to turn towards each other before scuttling over to the garden, sitting atop a well-laid array of bricks that reached up high enough for Cornelia to squat down and her head not to be seen by the cameras past the tomato plant. She then ran up onto the stone patio and leapt onto the stone table before making a huge leap towards the windowsill on the second floor with bringer light. She was above the height of the security cameras and then pulled her entire body up onto the thin ledge before grabbing her bayonet shotgun and shooting through the window, shattering it. Several glass fragments cut her cheek, but Cornelia ignored the damage to her face as she flipped through it and, using her handgun, shot the string that was holding up the bare head hanging over the closed bedroom door, and the head dropped down and broke the doorknob off. Lieutenant General Marshall Evans, hands where I can see them. See Colonel Lee Britannia. Evans had expected a cunning thief of some kind, not a fellow soldier. You seem rattled, Cornelia smiled, but it ceased almost immediately. I've caught you red-handed, Evans. Give yourself up. Hands on your head. Marshall wasn't one to argue with a gun-toting, well-trained soldier. Still, he was smiling nonetheless. This is pretty rash of you, Colonel. Normally you're more level-headed than this. So you admit it? Cornelia asked. I have not been arrested, Marshall continued to smile. It is only the two of us, so anything you and I say is not admissible in a court of law right now. Now is it? Who do you think would win if it came down to my word against yours? The real question is, what do you plan to do with those guns, Colonel? Kill me? You'll only be arrested for treason. You need to understand something, Evans. You can threaten me, be a sexist bastard and force Lady Marianne into retirement. Cornelia's expression grew hateful, but no one lays a malevolent hand on my sister and gets away with it. Cornelia spoke the last portions through gritted teeth. And again I reiterate, you have no proof and killing me will only dig you into a hole in which you'll find yourself buried alive. Then this is my solution, Cornelia said with a devilish smirk and shot Marshall in the leg, forcing him to the ground in pain before she shot the other one. He'd live. She'd made sure to use the non-sacredate ammo in her first clip. And I will prove it. Cornelia then called for backup and the authorities, and Marshall was arrested for his crimes. Cornelia figured he'd be executed, or, at the very least, she would not be seeing him for a very long time. March 2010 ATB. Cornelia was sitting around watching television. Marshall Evans had already been found guilty of his crimes against the Empire, but today was now the day of his sentencing. Cornelia was eager to find out what his punishment would be. Death? Life without parole? Vengeance burned within Cornelia's heart, and she wished to see justice done. Much to her dissatisfaction, though, it seemed Marshall was getting off easy. His chosen punishment, exile to the EU. Cornelia was not happy at all. Marshall would continue to spend life in prison until arrangements could be made for him to be sent away. This is not justice. Cornelia scowled. If the law will not punish a man who should hang for his crimes, then I will see justice done myself. She went to her bedroom and unlocked the display case to her bayonet shotgun. Evans, you are a dead man. May 2010 ATB. Cornelia had been down at the harbor all afternoon and evening, waiting for a chance to open fire on Marshall and be done with him. She was in the worst of moods too. She had started that day being called by Marianne to remove her guard and had been temporarily, until further notice, laid off. Cornelia had been devastated, telling Marianne this was a rash move. Even if Marshall was being exiled, that didn't mean the attacks would stop. Cornelia did her best to try and persuade Marianne not to do this, but Marianne had coldly told her no. Cornelia had ran out of the house crying and went back home. She intended to take Luna to the harbor and spend the rest of the day waiting for Marshall, only to find that her horse could barely get herself out of the barn. Cornelia took a good look at Luna and she knew that the day she dreaded had finally come. Tearfully she took Luna out into the wilderness, armed with her bayonet shotgun. Luna's eyes were old and worn, she could barely see Cornelia, but she could feel the second princess' familiar, gloved hand on her snout. Luna nickered. Her coat was losing its sheen, as was her mane. She couldn't even support Cornelia's weight anymore, and it had taken Cornelia an entire hour in what should have been a 15-minute trip. Luna, I'm sorry, please forgive me. You've been the best steed I could ask for all these years. I don't want to do this, but I don't want to make that phone call. You're my friend and I'll end your suffering myself. Cornelia held up her weapon. Please find peace, she shed a tear, wherever it is you go when you fade from here. It took a single shot from Cornelia's gun to put Luna out of her misery. No suffering, no bleeding out, Cornelia had managed to tear Luna's heart asunder with a single blast. Luna collapsed on the ground and Cornelia spent several more hours burying her horse and making a tombstone. She cleaned herself with a shower and changed into a fresh uniform and headed for the harbor. She had a date with destiny to keep still. She could still end the day on a positive note, killing Marshall Evans. Cornelia intended to focus all of her anger and rage on the man who had caused so much pain for the Empire. She was going to use her spiritual rounds from her handgun rather than use her bayonet shotgun. She figured that since the projectiles left behind no traces of use and anyone could get their hands on such a weapon, that it would remove traces of forensic evidence. Cornelia waited by the nearest warehouse. She had bribed a dock worker to find out which ship Evans would be taking. She had made the bribe under the cover of shadow and only reached her arm into the light. The man never saw her face. Cornelia was in the habit of wearing gloves so her fingerprints would not be on the bribe money, and she had just made the withdrawal of it from the bank upon arriving in the harbor town. It was 10:30 when Marshall finally pulled up. His ship would not arrive until half after midnight, but Cornelia was ready to make her move now. Marshall was alone, no guards, no escort. When she was certain they were alone, Cornelia approached him from the shadows. Marshall was standing at the edge of the pier and having what would wind up being his last smoke. "Ah, Colonel Lee Britannia," he smiled when he saw her. Cornelia whipped out the high-caliber handgun she had been carrying and aimed it directly at Marshall's heart and left lung. Then, without word or warning, shot him through the chest with a spiritual blast so powerful it disintegrated his heart and lungs. The last thing Marshall saw, as his body fell backwards into the ocean, was Cornelia's smoking gun. The last Cornelia would ever see of Marshall would be his terror-stricken eyes as she fired off her weapon. After the splash and the body of her enemy sunk into the water, Cornelia put her gun away and left the scene. Cornelia, though her revenge had succeeded, now wanted to waste away through the night. She made her way back home and locked herself from the inside in the wine cellar, popping open all of the alcohol her mother never let her use or was saving for a special occasion that never came. Binge drinking was not healthy and she knew that, but she was having a really bad day and she just wanted it to be fucking over and she was just so upset with everything. She passed out on the ground after about an hour of drinking. She woke up in cellar at 9 a.m. with one of the worst hangovers in history, or at least that's how it felt to her. Staggering out up to the door and yanking at it a few times before remembering she had locked herself in, clutching her head all the while, Cornelia's eyes burned fiercely from the sunlight that illuminated into the Lee Britannia Manor. It was then that her watch began to beep and remind her of the time. Cornelia, fighting through her horrible headache, intended to go and get to the Ares Palace, forgetting because of the hangover of her temporary discharge. However, before she got halfway up the stairs she got sluggish and her stomach became upset and she wound up making a mad dash down to the kitchen and heaved into the sink. If I drink again in my life it will certainly never be like this. Next time I go straight to the legal limit or stay under it. After throwing up twice more as she made her way through her morning routine she remembered about Marianne laying her off. Cornelia sighed, figuring she'd at least go and apologize to Marianne for arguing with her. She may have been hungover, but she could contain her composure if it meant talking with her idol. When she finally got to the Ares Palace it was about 10:30 a.m. Cornelia was still hungover a little, but she was able to take note of the shattered windows at the front entrance. Still, not understanding the potential implications she pushed open the large palace doors and entered the foyer and heard the crowd that had gathered. Lelich stood on top of the stairs, shaking. That was the first thing she saw. He looked frightened, terrified. Cornelia, confused, followed his gaze with her eyes. Her own eyes turned wide as she saw the blood all over the stairs and the one corpse she never wanted to see in her life. Lady Marianne. Cornelia's voice trembled. She approached in a daze and saw the dead empress lying on the ground in a heap. The only thing the second princess could think to do was scream. Lady Marianne. End of chapter 146. Chapter 147, Cornelia's Shattered Soul. Late May 2010. Lelich sat in the royal palace in front of a chessboard, playing against Clovis. He was due to meet with his father, the emperor, later that morning so he was dressed in his finest apparel. Clovis had come by to take another gander at the art gallery, but when he noticed Lelich sitting all by himself in front of the chess table he challenged him to a match. Lelich played competitively as always, but his mind was elsewhere and Clovis was also playing more determined that morning as well. Perhaps the planets were aligned a certain way or the angle of the moon, sun, and earth was just right because through the game it looked like that, for the first time, Clovis was going to beat Lelich. The game continued until a sentry came to collect the 11th prince and escort him to the throne room. Clovis begged the guard to let he and Lelich finish the game, but Lelich chewed him out. Only a fool keeps his majesty waiting. Lelich snapped, "There'll be plenty of time for chess after I've had a word with his majesty." Lelich then tromped towards the throne room, side by side with the guard. Clovis looked at the chessboard in wonder. The match was inconclusive, but from the looks of things, it really looked like Clovis might win the way the match was going. Not wanting to give up his one chance to beat his younger half-brother, Clovis waited patiently all day for Lelich to return, humming songs to himself and politely asking the guards for nourishment. But Lelich never came back. Eventually Clovis' curfew was called and his knight came to bring him back to Gabrielle. Clovis sighed, knowing the pieces would be rearranged overnight. It would be a few days later when he would learn that Lelich had been banished to Japan. Clovis had hoped that Lelich would return and he could have his rematch, but he would never get that opportunity for as long as he lived. Summer 2010 ATB. Mizuho, Tokyo Metropolis, Japan. With the death of Marianne VI Britannia, and the insolence of her children causing them to be banished, the Six Britannia house had all but collapsed. It was all over the news, the death of the Empress and the deportment of her children, and this had not escaped the notice of one Mizuho Precinct detective, Homicide Unit, Kurosaki Ichigo. He had seen the broadcast and it floored him when an image of Lelouch appeared on screen. Coincidence? Unlikely. Ichigo had known Lelouch to keep secrets from him before, but what did this mean exactly? He had called Urahara and asked if he could speak with Lelouch as soon as possible, but the shopkeeper had let Ichigo's calls go to voicemail and he wasn't returning them. That didn't sit right with Ichigo, but there was nothing he could do about it. Ichigo had a job to take care of. In 2007 Ichigo had started off as a rookie in the Mizuho Precinct as a regular cop, often getting snacks or coffee for the higher UPS. He had been shown the ropes and in the 3 years that had passed, Ichigo had become a detective with the Homicide Unit. In the middle of his second year with the precinct, Ichigo had the option of joining the Homicide Unit or the Special Victims. Ichigo went with the former. Ichigo had tried the latter first, only for his rage to constantly get the better of him and his superior felt he'd be better at consoling families than he was with the actual victims. In addition to that, Ichigo had been having a weak stomach for a lot of the cases he had been on in SVU. At least the homicides were open/shut murder or attempted murder. No rape, no strange pictures of someone's mother, and no breaking into some fat slobbery nerd's house and catching him with his pants down. However, the Homicide Unit had done little to curb Ichigo's anger. He still found it hard to deal with uncooperative suspects with no concern for human life. Like right now. You son of a bitch. Ichigo slammed the current suspect, Tanaka Jin, up against the wall. The man was wanted for murder of his fiancée and her older sister. The man had his lawyer with him, but Ichigo and his partner had already gotten him to confess to the sister's murder, to which Jin mentioned that it was because he had accidentally created a witness. Cool it, Ichigo. You're going to get Gomen Teiko angry with us again, Ichigo's partner, Chiba Nagisa, said to him. Gomen Teiko was in reference to Police Captain Gomen Hitachi, their superior and head of the Homicide Unit. Nagisa was 22 and new to the Homicide Unit itself, just coming out of college this year. She had interned at the precinct before, which was why she was able to immediately get put into a specialized squadron. Ichigo was her superior. In the time she had known him, Nagisa had revered her partner for his knowledge, cool head, and skill as an officer. However, even she had to be taken aback whenever he lost his temper towards a suspect. How could you? Just like that you killed her? Don't you even care about what you did to your fiancée? Ichigo scowled. Tanaka-san, you don't have to answer that, his lawyer told him. However, Tanaka didn't seem to care and he smirked into Ichigo's face. What's the matter, Officer Kurosaki? Do I piss you off? I've heard all about you. You always like to be Mr. Hero and feel that anyone who doesn't have a good reason or regrets terrible actions is a monster that needs to be locked up. But who's the real monster? The man who kills or the man that kills the man that killed? I'm no killer, Ichigo told Jin, but I will break your face if I have to. Ichigo then let the guy go. He walked outside of the interrogation room and patted the district attorney twice on the shoulder. All yours, I'm stepping out. Ichigo went to the nearest bench down by the precinct, took off his suit jacket, folded it neatly next to him on the bench and stared at the ground. People like that just rubbed him the wrong way. Ichigo had become an officer of the law to remove people like Tanaka from the streets. Ever since the incident with needles back in high school, Ichigo had intended to take up the law. Originally he was going to study medicine under his father, but after his adventures as a soul reaper and the incident with needles, Ichigo changed his mind. He did take an anatomy class in college, if nothing else than to know where the most vulnerable points on the human body were. The law classes he was required to take were pretty mind-numbing stuff, but Ichigo managed to graduate with a really high GPA. As he sat on the bench recalling his college life, a Pepsi can entered his field of vision. He looked up to see Nagisa offering it to him with a smile. Here, she said to him, it's the zero kind. Thanks, Ichigo said, taking the soda can and cracking it open. He took a deep breath as his partner sat down on the side of him opposite his suit jacket. Case getting to you because of your family relations? Nagisa asked him. Yeah, pretty much, Ichigo sighed. Nagisa hadn't been assigned to him by chance. She was his co-I in college. She and Ichigo had studied together for tests. Despite being a year apart, they often wound up in the same classes for electives and the like. Nagisa found it amusing how she and Ichigo kept bumping into each other. Ichigo found it more or less irritating, wondering if there was some paranormal force manipulating the scheduling system. It happened way too often to keep being a coincidence. He had also seen her at the precinct the several times she interned. They'd known each other for several years now. They were friends and partners, but that was as far as the relationship went. Both knew the dangers of having a family or getting cozy. Or at least, that was Nagisa's reasoning as to why she thought she shouldn't make a move on Ichigo and why he wasn't on her. Nagisa had never met Orium, nor did she know the young woman's relationship with Ichigo. Despite studying together all the time, the topic never came up. Ichigo wasn't the type to talk about personal issues. He and Nagisa exchanged basic information, but other than that they didn't talk about their personal lives much around each other. Of course, Ichigo had more reasons for not letting Nagisa in. The exact nature of the current relationship between Ichigo and Orium, however, was, two were still in contact with each other, but the lovey-dovey high school sweetheart note they had parted at the train station on had died out at the end of Ichigo's freshman year. He still cared for her deeply like all his other friends, but they hadn't been on a proper date in more than 5 years now. They'd seen each other from time to time, but it was always with Tatsuki and the others. Ichigo's schedule was just constantly full compared to Orium's more flexible one. And yet, despite that, Ichigo didn't want to feel like he was losing the only woman he felt he ever really loved. He wanted one chance to be alone with Orium, but he kept missing that chance. As Ichigo sipped his can of soda, Nagisa watched him. She had taken notice that, by default, Ichigo always seemed to be scowling about something. However, his frightening grimace was betrayed by how polite he was towards his co-workers. If you could get over the intimidation, Ichigo was rather approachable, and he was always sweet and polite to Nagisa and always looking out for her. During college, Nagisa didn't want a relationship with anyone. She wanted to be able to focus on her studies, but, at the same time, she had grown attached to Ichigo as both a friend and a human being. She wondered if she shouldn't take the risk in opening herself up to Ichigo. Neither talked much about their personal lives in college, mostly just stuff they'd been up to in their spare time and their plans for later in the day. Nagisa felt now was as good a time as ever to throw herself out there. "Say, Ichigo." "Yeah?" Ichigo asked, not turning to look in her direction, still slumped forward and sipping out of the soda she had gotten him. "If you're not busy some nights this week since we're not on a case, do you want to perhaps maybe grab a bite to eat, just us?" Night time. The biggest vacuum of Ichigo's free time. While Mizuho was much quieter than Karakura Town in terms of hollow activity, it was far from safe. There was at least one attack a night on this place compared to the 20 or so a night in Karakura Town on really bad nights. Ichigo was constantly on patrol if he wasn't on a case. True, he could leave the whole ordeal to the town's representative, but as a substitute he felt it was his duty to help out. If Lelouch had the opportunity to speak with him, he would have told Ichigo that he was too inset on protecting the world and that he should have faith in the Soul Society once in a while. Perhaps then the police officer would have the opportunity to go out and see Orium. His double life was eating into his real life, but he always had the latter take priority when it came to his job. "Sorry, I have plans," Ichigo said, standing up and grabbing his jacket. He finished the soda, crushed the can and threw it in the trash bin. "All week." Nagisa exasperated in disbelief. "You wouldn't understand," Ichigo said. "It's not something I can share with you." "Even though I'm your partner?" Nagisa asked. "Even though you're my partner," Ichigo repeated. He walked over to his car, opened the driver's side door, turned on the car and drove away. He got back to his one-bedroom apartment and looked at his phone, scrolling through the numbers. He stopped when he got to Orium's number, wondering if he should call it. The last time they'd spoken was on New Year's. If he didn't call now, he was certain he wouldn't hear from the woman again until his birthday or the anniversary of his mother's death. She had the dates in her head by heart. Would he call her and begin reparations of their relationship, or was it too late? There was only one way to find out. Ami, Ibaraka Prefecture. Far off to the northeast, 2.5 hours from Mizuho, give or take the traffic, was the location of a small bake shop / dine-in restaurant. It was staffed and run by a single woman. She had bought the place just last year, shortly after her birthday in September. She had had her eye on the unused property and had been saving up to buy it off. The owner was none other than Anu Orium. She had gotten her culinary degree at college and had spent the last 3 years cooking, baking and serving. While her own appetite remained rather strange, Orium's will to try new and interesting recipes and led to some interesting discoveries on her part. And, strangely enough, some of her stranger dishes actually sold well. Orium's baked goods were her best creations and they were what made her small little shop popular. However, she also had chairs and tables set up for customers whose sweet tooth wasn't their strong point. In a marvel to all of her friends, and 3,000 yen out of Ichigo's pocket to Tatsuki on a failed bet, Orium wound up on the cover of a magazine for her recipe for her jalapeno and rice stuffed crab cakes with soy sauce and a honey glaze. A dish only Orium herself could think to create, but one that had given her a small taste of fame, though it hadn't brought her as much fortune as one might expect. Business was usually slow around this time of year and day. Orium's warm pastries weren't sought after during the warm weather and the woman hadn't exactly nailed down frozen treats quite yet. She was making a profit, but her failed creations always wound up keeping her business from soaring. Of course, what really disappointed her was that, since buying the shop and setting it up, none of her friends, except Tatsuki, had found the time in their busy schedules to come by. Chad and Ichigo were the most understandable, with the former's accounting job eating up almost all of his time and the latter always on a case, but it surprised Orium that Yoshino hadn't been able to stop by and she and Tatsuki were still in Karakura town. Kigo had a career playing bass guitar for hire. He hadn't exactly managed to form his own band or become the lead guitarist for an existing one. It paid the bills, but it was nothing special. Uriah was all the way out in Hiroshima. If anyone was going to hear from him, it would be by phone. His relationship with Yoshino was strained. Uriah was trying to get the money for a 2-person home or find 2 open apartments in close distance from each other. He did miss her after all, but Yoshino was having no luck selling the house, nor was she having any luck finding a job way out by the young doctor. Uriah had a medical license and marrying his sewing hobby to his license had been a surgeon for 3 years and he was pretty good at that. Even surgeries with high risk were no consequence when a patient was under the knife of Ishida Uriah, MD. His patients almost always recovered. It was rumored that Uriah had some sort of healing touch to the point that he could fix anyone he cut open no matter the odds. Tatsuki had taken over the dojo in Karakura town that she and Ichigo had trained in. After Yuzu and Karen graduated from high school, so iPhone and Yoriyuki moved back into the Soul Society. Urahara had told them, "Your job is complete." The two had their own place in the Seirei now. So iPhone missed teaching, but neither she nor Yoriyuki wanted back into the Go-Di for now. Maybe they'd get themselves reinstated, maybe not. Right now, both just wanted to relax. Urahara, Tessai, Ururu, and Hinta were all still in Karakura town. Urahara had known about Lelich's temporal paradox longer than anyone else. However, he too was getting ready to call this one and go. A war zone was no place for Ururu and Hinta. As soon as war broke out, Urahara was ready to leave the world of the living and join his friends in the Soul Society. Back in Ami though, Orium was kneading dough to make another batch of honey, wasabi, red bean paste, and pork buns when the bell hanging on her door rang, indicating that she had a customer. She smiled widely to the old woman that had come in. "Oh, hello," Orium said jubilantly, "welcome to the Red Bean Diner. Is there something I can help you with?" "Yes, my grandson is very fond of your jam-filled pecan muffins. Do you have some?" "Of course, would you like a 6-pack? That would be nice." "I'll be right back." Orium went into the back room and into the fridge to get one of her packaged muffin 6-pack. She had her stock alphabetized and all of her food was homemade, so she saved a lot of money on shipping for ready-made products. She came back with 2 6-packs. One was lemon jam, the other was peach. "These are the only 2 kinds I've made right now. Is that okay?" "Oh, the peach is perfect," the old woman said, "those are his favorite." 1/2 dozen peach jam-filled pecan muffins coming right up, Orium rang up the old woman and gave her a bag. That'll be 1,230 yen. The old woman gave Orium a 2,000 yen bill. Orium counted out her change and the old woman proceeded to leave. Thank you for stopping by. Please come again. Orium's cheerful demeanor constantly kept customers coming back to her store. She was always so polite, even in the face of an unruly customer. After all, Orium had a black belt in martial arts. Anyone who tried to pick a fight with her might find themselves losing a few teeth. However, Orium never threw the first punch, or kick. Since her home was connected to her store, she went into the back and sat down to relax. She made herself a bucket of honey and wasabi popcorn and decided to start up a movie she had rented from the library. However, before she could turn the movie on, her phone went off. She answered it promptly. Moshi Moshi, she said. There was no answer on the other line. Hello? Anyone there? After a few more moments of silence, Orium hung up. However, she smiled when she saw the caller ID. Ichigo. Mizuho, Tokyo Metropolis. Timing couldn't be worse for the young detective. Just as he had called Orium's number, his substitute badge started going off. Since he was living alone, Ichigo hardly used Kon anymore, much to the plushie's chagrin. In fact, he no longer kept Kon in a plush body. He, in fact, kept Kon's pill in his front pocket, unless he was home, in which Kon was kept in a jar one would normally house fireflies in. True, Ichigo could no longer vent his frustrations on Kon if he did something stupid, but he'd rather have the silence than the satisfaction of revenge, much to Kon's chagrin. And he only used the mod soul if he wasn't home anyway, and since most of Ichigo's fights were at night, Kon's annoyance was understandable. As Ichigo leapt from rooftop to rooftop, ready to draw Zanjutsu at a moment's notice, he thought back on Orium. One day, Orium. One day I will see you again. Pendragon, Britannia Mansion. Since Mary Ann's death, Cornelia had just not been herself at all. She hardly ate, didn't leave the house, and spent most of her days on her stomach, head turned to the side, lights off, on her bed, in despair. She would just lie there on her bed, day in and day out, like a log, an empty shell. Yuffie had tried lifting her sister's spirits many times, but it was as if Cornelia was dead inside. Her idol, along with her motivation, had been taken from her in an instant, and of course Cornelia blamed herself for not being able to protect Mary Ann. She should have been there for her regardless of orders, was what she believed. Cornelia continued to lay face down on the bed, head turned to the side, eyes dull and empty, soul shattered, spirit broken. If she were awake, she may have shouted at the Inked Alliance, cursed them. Their goal was to break her spirit, and they had succeeded. Cornelia wanted nothing more than a quick death and to follow her idol to the grave. Knowing of the sorry state she was in, Schneeisel decided to visit. He opened Cornelia's bedroom door and knocked on it. Cornelia? Are you okay? Cornelia didn't respond, she just lay there. It's Schneeisel, you know, your wonderful half-brother. Go away, Cornelia mumbled. Schneeisel sat on her bed and rubbed her back for a little while. I'm sure it hurts, Cornelia. She's gone. She's gone and she's not coming back, but what about you? Were all of your accomplishments really so you could impress Mary Ann to gain her constant approval? Isn't there a part of you separate from her that makes you unique? It doesn't matter now. Cornelia finally moved and clenched her hands slightly, turning her head in the other direction. She's gone, Schneeisel. Lady Mary Ann, my childhood idol, my motivation for becoming a soldier, is gone. Moping in bed isn't good for you, Schneeisel told her, and forced Cornelia to sit up and dangled her arm around his shoulder, supporting her and making her walk. I think what you need is a good breath of fresh air. You've been in your room for far too long, you need to get out a little. Okay, Cornelia said weakly. Outside, Schneeisel could tell Cornelia was starting to feel a little better. Well, she was until Guinevere passed by with two of her consorts. And you know it's like not that much of a bummer. I mean, Mary Ann Six Britannia was just some commoner bilge rat when she was born. She wouldn't even be empress if the emperor didn't favor her, which I think is stupid, Guinevere preached and then put a hand over her bountiful bosom. Now my mother, on the other hand, Farah Subritannia, would make a fine new empress, and she would do a much better job than that filthy, peasant, two-bit whore. Guinevere should have paid more attention to her surroundings. If she had, she would have noticed that Cornelia was nearby. Of course, this being Guinevere and all, she probably would not have cared. Nevertheless, she was saying the wrong things in front of the traumatized second princess. In her weird mental state, Cornelia didn't just get angry, she went berserk. She flew off the handle, raging towards Guinevere without a single thought going through her mind. Well, there was one thought: kill. Kill painfully and brutally. The look in Cornelia's eyes was one of senseless, frenzied anger. She punched Guinevere across the face as hard as she possibly could, knocking her older sister to the ground, and then loomed over her and began repeatedly slugging her in the face. Guinevere's consorts were just standing there with dumbfounded looks on their face, unsure how to react as the first princess was put in potential mortal danger. It was fact that if Cornelia kept going, and no one did anything, that she would eventually bludgeon her older half-sister to death. Schneeisel, being the only person in the general area with any testosterone, ran up to Cornelia and restrained her by putting his arms underneath her armpits and pulling her back. Cornelia kicked her legs furiously, trying to break free. "Let me go. I'll kill her. I'll kill that bitch." Cornelia had flat out lost it, but it was understandable under the circumstances, not that it justified what she nearly done in the least. Schneeisel was lucky he had pulled Cornelia off when he did. Guinevere had long since slipped into unconsciousness and was on the ground in a pool of her own blood. Any further, and Cornelia might have inflicted serious, irrevocable damage not only to Guinevere's face, but also to her brain with the way she had been fiercely assaulting her. Schneeisel put Cornelia in a full Nelson in order to better restrain her. "Get a hold of yourself, Cornelia," he told her. "I understand you're upset, but that doesn't justify killing your older half-sister." Cornelia just continued to struggle. "Ladies, I am so sorry," Schneeisel said to Guinevere's consorts. "Please give my sincerest apologies to Guinevere when she comes to, and do make sure that she receives proper medical attention." Schneeisel would have done the latter himself, but he was currently wrestling with a very livid Cornelia and would have had an easier time doing such a thing to a charging rhinoceros. Eventually, he managed to gain the advantage and throw Cornelia to the ground. She landed on her leg and both her arms, but the shock and strain of her muscles sort of brought her to her senses. Cornelia was still miffed, but she wasn't a raging lunatic anymore. Both she and Schneeisel panted heavily to regulate their breathing for quite a while. When Cornelia had finally calmed down, Schneeisel took her out on his yacht. The sea air seemed to calm Cornelia quite a lot. Schneeisel handed her a cocktail while they were out on the water. When he believed the moment was right, the second prince struck up conversation with his 1 month older half-sister. "Cornelia," he began, "I don't know if you know this, but Lelich and Nunnally were sent to Japan as political hostages." Cornelia didn't say anything and just continued looking over the side of the boat. Rumors of war erupting between Britannia and Japan are spreading. The army is mobilizing for a campaign already. It's rumored that His Majesty could make a war declaration at the drop of a hat. You should go out there, Cornelia. The keys to your Glasgow were entrusted to me. There was no response and Cornelia just looked out at the calm sea. Schneeisel sighed. "Cornelia, there is nothing you can do for Lady Marianne, but you can protect her children. Go and get Lelich and Nunnally and bring them back safely. Get in shape and rescue them." Cornelia turned away from the water and headed for the cabin. "It's no good, Schneeisel. My resolve is broken." She opened the door and added, before she closed it behind her, "I'm sorry." Le Britannia Mansion. Cornelia sat in front of the television watching old home videos. The memories of her and her siblings having such a good time were all she had left of Marianne. "Cornelia." It was Yuffie calling her. Cornelia didn't answer and just continued to stare at the TV. Yuffie pushed on the armrest of the recliner Cornelia was sitting in. "Lady Marianne meant a lot to you, but you can't give up. You told me you would never surrender to terrorists no matter what happened. We're all really worried about Lelich and Nunnally. Protect them, sis, you're the only one who can." Yuffie looked at her sister, but she just sat there doing nothing except continue to watch the movie that was playing. Yuffie, feeling defeated, left the room. Yuffie then heard crying, but it was coming from the TV. It was an old clip on New Year's Eve. Yuffie was, at the time, only a little more than a year old. She had crawled along the ground and had bumped her head against the coffee table. As she sat on the ground, crying, Cornelia picked her up to console her. Dolores, much unlike Marianne, was mostly inattentive to her children, letting the servants do most of the raising. Of course, at least she knew the basics of her children's needs, otherwise she wouldn't be able to instruct the servants properly or know when they did something wrong. Nevertheless, Cornelia always was the one doting on Yuffie, regardless of servant interference. She watched herself holding Yuffie in the video. "Ah, don't cry Euphemia, it's okay," Cornelia kissed Yuffie's forehead, "it's okay, your big sis is here. Nothing's going to hurt you, I'm right here. Nothing will hurt her." Cornelia seemed to be in a bit of a trance watching the video. As it continued, Lelich, now a little more than 2 years old, staggered towards Cornelia and hugged her leg. Sounds of how adorable it was came from other individuals at the celebration. "Ah, look who loves his big sister," though not in the shot, Marianne was the one speaking, "You love all your little siblings, don't you Cornelia?" Mostly just Lelich and Yuffie. Cornelia bent down to affectionately stroke Lelich's head as she held Yuffie with one arm. The camera panned to Marianne. "Yes, you'd never let anything happen to either of them, would you? And even the second child I plan on having. You wouldn't let anything happen to them either, would you, Cornelia?" Sitting on the couch, Cornelia began to cry. "No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't, Lady Marianne." Cornelia rose up to her feet. Yuffie had been standing just outside the room listening to the whole thing. Cornelia grabbed the remote and stopped the video. She dropped to her knees and cried a little. "No, I won't let anything happen to them. I promised you." Lady Marianne, Cornelia began to cry. Finally, after all the time of just lying there like a log in shock, she was finally entering grief. Yuffie was surprised. Cornelia never cried. Even when their mother died, Cornelia never cried once. She was sorrowful and saddened, but tears never showed. Yuffie thought her sister had lost the ability to grieve, but she saw she was wrong and she felt she had to do something. Yuffie walked over to Cornelia and hugged her sister. Cornelia then brought her in close and held on to her only blood sibling for a little while, sobbing. It was a long time before she stopped. When she finished, Cornelia stood up. Yuffie looked up at her sister's eyes. There was life in them yet again. More importantly, there was strength reflected in her eyes. Yuffie smiled. "Euphemia," Cornelia spoke to her. "Ah, yes," Yuffie was surprised by Cornelia's sudden serious tone. "Get in the car, I'm going to base," Cornelia said sternly. Yuffie nodded her head, "Yes, right away." Cornelia drove all the way to the military base. The soldiers were surprised to see her, but also many were glad, saluting her. "Colonel." Some addressed her. Yuffie walked at her sister's side as she marched straight to Darlton's office. She entered without warning and slammed her hands on the desk and leaned into Darlton's face, glaring. "I want in on the Japan campaign and I won't take no for an answer." Cornelia was more than overstepping her boundaries demanding things out of a superior officer, but she knew Darlton on a personal level, so she was hoping he wouldn't hold that against her. Not to mention, she really wouldn't take no for an answer. Darlton looked at her right in the eye. Cornelia was giving him the iciest stare. He saw the confidence in her eyes had returned. He had heard the reports that Cornelia's soul had been more than shattered, but that was not the gaze reflected in the soldier standing before him. Darlton saw the gaze of a soldier ready to do battle. No, not battle. He would be unfit to be general if he couldn't see Cornelia's underlying ulterior motive. "All right," he said, "but get yourself back in shape. Your hands are shaking and you're a little out of it physically. Your uniform's a bit crinkled and I'm sure you haven't been practicing. You will follow the orders you are given. Try to keep the chaos to a minimum. Don't do anything stupid." Cornelia knew he must have figured out the real reason she was going. "Sir," she saluted, "I won't let you down." "Good." Darlton wrote her name down on a sheet of paper. "I'll have Schneeisel forward the key to your Glasgow. Until then, get in shape and get something to eat. I heard you've been refusing meals." As if on cue, Cornelia's stomach growled. She flushed a little, but cleared her throat and simply said, "Sir, yes sir." "Good to hear it," Darlton told her. Dismissed. Sir, Cornelia said again and left Darlton's office. Oh, and by the way, Colonel, Darlton said just as Cornelia reached the door. Cornelia turned her head. Welcome back, he said to her. Cornelia simply smiled and headed off to get some food. Over the next few weeks, Cornelia trained her body to get back in shape. She had looked a mess in Darlton's office, and because she hadn't been training, her muscle had begun to wane, but she trained to get it back. She lost 15 pounds and returned back to her normal weight. The sheen and vibrancy in her hair returned. Cornelia retrained herself with her firearms and even managed to get some practice in with her nightmare. In secret, she trained with her spiritual techniques. She was going to Japan, a culture built on spirituality. There was no telling if her abilities might come in handy. The goddess of victory, formerly known as the royal soldier, always entered a battlefield prepared. Yuffie helped Cornelia a little with her morning training, acting as her spotter for exercises like sit-ups, pull-ups, and jogging, in which Yuffie would ride her bike and force Cornelia to catch up with her. Through this training, Cornelia managed to get her mastery back of her fancy little super steps, as she had been calling it. As part of her training, she even took on a few officers in a friendly spar with nothing but her bare hands. It took her a few tries, but eventually Cornelia was able to do the training without getting hit once. She was like lightning, strong and quick. As the training continued, Cornelia added more and more officers, and by the end of July, the goddess of victory had returned to the battlefield, and on August 10th, the war was here. On the evening of her departure, before the sun went down, since her flight out would be incredibly early, Cornelia paid a visit to Mary Ann's gravestone. She stood in front of the grave of the greatest woman she ever knew, buried as a commoner. It was unfair. Mary Ann was not buried with the grandness of an empress' death. It was unjust. I swear upon your spirit's peace, Lady Mary Ann, I will hunt down and kill whoever did this to you, and I will rescue Lelich and Nunnally. So please rest easy. Cornelia caressed the headstone. I will perform the duty that I should have done the night you perished. My actions now are not as a soldier of Britannia, but as your relative. I will bring your children back safe, I promised you. Cornelia then turned away from the tombstone and headed off. Cornelia's flight over the next morning was actually the second wave, with the first wave having left late last night. Cornelia would drop down in about half a day. Her nightmare frame was coming over on a separate helicarrier. Normally Cornelia would address her men and give a speech, but she'd save it for when they touched on the ground, and only if she was asked to. Right now there was only one thought going through the soldier's mind: Nunnally, Lelich, I will save you. End of chapter 147. Chapter 148, Ichigo vs Cornelia, the battle begins. August 11, 2010 ATB. Ami, Ibaraka Prefecture. The morning had started as relatively peaceful. Orium woke up and opened her shop like she did every morning promptly at 8 a.m. The sun was shining brightly that day and the sky was clear. All in all, it looked like a good day. With no customers to arrive yet, Orium sat down in the back and turned on the news. The news that greeted her, however, couldn't stand in a bigger contrast to the sunny day. The news reporter, reporting from the Tokyo metropolis, was mentioning how Britannia had made a surprise attack on Japan and had surrounded the poor little island nation and had made huge advances in a single night. Orium listened to the entire news story, horrified by the images she saw and gasping for her breath by the suddenness and cruelty she was witnessing. Some brave reporters had gone live to the war zone. Actual video footage of the war was captured until either the reporter or the cameraman was killed on screen. It was violent and brutal, and Orium shuddered all throughout it, fighting not to hurl. And then, when it was over, she stood rigidly, acting like nothing had happened, promptly turned off the TV, went over to the front of her store and flipped the open sign back over to closed. She turned off all the lights, put the chairs back up on the tables and went into the back room. She walked over to a long, thin trunk and clicked it open. Inside the trunk was a white uniform. It was her old Aaron Carr uniform from when she had been in Hueco Mundo. She'd had the suit tailored and modified with Uriu's expertise, to be more form-fitting and suited for combat. After her last adventure, Orium wanted the suit to be more comfortable and customized, and the skirt kept getting in the way. It was Tatsuki's suggestion since Orium was a black belt, so she may as well be able to use it to the best of her ability. The shopkeeper no longer used the mantle the uniform originally came with, it created too much drag. She also had the skirt removed and had form-fitting nylon legs attached in order to fight more effectively. She had nothing covering her shoulders, but she didn't mind. Orium removed her top and removed her skirt and let it fall to the ground, standing in her bedroom in just her undergarments. She did a little bit of stretching and then she put on her uniform. She looked at herself in the mirror. Even after not wearing the uniform for more than 5 years, it still fit. Orium smiled as she looked in the mirror. I wonder what Ichigo would say if he saw me now, Orium thought to herself. She looked positively divine. Orium was fully grown, at the peak of her beauty. She had the air of a finely groomed young woman. She'd remain gorgeous for at least 20 more years before her looks started to deteriorate. She shook such vain thoughts from her mind. This was not the time to be admiring her view in the mirror and noticing how she had kept her good looks so easily. She had a job to do, and by the afterlife she was going to do it. In her closet, resting on the top shelf, Orium took out a strong box and opened it with a key she kept in her bottom night table drawer. She opened the strong box and took out her trusty hairpins from her brother and the necklace Ichigo had gotten her for Christmas. The necklace may not have helped her produce any new powers yet, but Orium felt more confident when she wore it because it was something Ichigo had given her that she would always have. Nothing material he had given her was more precious than that necklace. She gripped the necklace with a content smile and let out a small swoon sigh. She then exited her home/diner/bakery through the back door. Her gaze tightened. Orium knew what she was doing. She was going to help people from Britannia's cruelty. What they were doing would not go unchecked, even by a pacifist like her. However, before she even walked 10 stops her stomach churned and she made a break for the nearest dumpster and hurled. She went back inside, cleaned her mouth and came back outside. I guess I'm not as strong as I thought. Orium thought to herself. Why can't I be more like you, Ichigo? Pendragon, Britannia. Schneeisel had made an arrangement to see Charles that morning. After his father's declaration of war the other day, Schneeisel wanted to speak with Charles directly. He knew Cornelia had gone out there to rescue Lelich and Nunnally, and Schneeisel had some choice words for his father's abrupt decision. Schneeisel was seen by the same nobles and same state of affairs that his younger brother, Lelich, had been surrounded by months before. Schneeisel was allowed entry only after Charles had sat down. He bowed on one knee in respect. Your Majesty. He then stood up straight. Schneeisel, this had better be important. I have a war to oversee. That's precisely why I wanted to talk to you. Why did you call the war so soon? Lelich and Nunnally are still exiled. Those two are dead to this family, Schneeisel. The sooner you forget about them the better. Schneeisel's jaw hung open for a moment that Charles had just said that. He and several of his half-siblings adored Lelich and Nunnally. How could his father be so cold-hearted? But your Majesty, Schneeisel, you must understand that only the strong can remain in this world. If you plan on taking the throne one day, you must understand that sometimes the best way to procure your standing in society is to eliminate the strongest competition. What competition? These are your children far down the line in hierarchy. I would become emperor long before Lelich would. Schneeisel's voice was raised, but he was not yelling. At the age of 20, he knew better than to angrily lash out at the emperor. And? What's your point? Your Majesty. Lelich was an upstart that did not know his place. This is not about him. Schneeisel blinked. Then you mean to? Yes, Charles nodded before Schneeisel could finish his sentence. He had stopped him mostly because he didn't want the other nobles to hear it. He and Schneeisel were on the same wavelength though. As far as Charles was concerned, this was a test of Cornelia's ability as a soldier. If she could rescue her siblings, it would gain her points in his favor, as if life was some kind of game to him. Schneeisel frowned at his father. As much as I understand your actions, your Majesty, I must say I wholeheartedly disagree with them. And what would you do in my place, Schneeisel? Japan is a nation we require to survive. What would you do differently? I don't know. and that is why you are not yet fit to be emperor. If you had an answer you would leave me with an opportune heir, but, as things stand, you, Odysseus, Guinevere and Cornelia have done nothing but disappoint me. But Cornelia stopped the inked alliance. Then explain how this country's empress is now dead. Unable to come up with an answer, Schneeisel remained silent and simply bit his lip in irritation. Leave, Schneeisel. We have nothing more to discuss. Yes, your majesty, pardon me for taking up your time, Schneeisel said. He then turned around and left the room. I tried my best, Cornelia, it's up to you now. Ami, Ibaraka Prefecture. Orium ran through the streets of her town in a panic. Britannian soldiers had already begun opening fire on civilians and terrorizing the town. The idea was to make their way towards central Tokyo. The taking of the capital would spell the end of the war for the Japanese. Their forces were advancing quickly. Hiroshima and Nagasaki had already fallen and the Western troops were already making their way east. Britannia's airdrops were attempting to surround all Japanese soldiers and box them into Tokyo, before dropping an air raid and wiping out whatever resistance remained. However, Tokyo was to be the escort location of 11th Prince and Princess Lelich and Nunnally 6 Britannia, as well as the young master of the Kurugi family, Kurugi Suzaku. That was, of course, because Japan was oblivious to Britannia's plan and tactics. Orium was being chased by Britannian soldiers. When she saw a dying civilian on the side of the road, not soon after she had left her shop, she had begun using Soten Kishun to heal him. She was growing fatigued though, and her Santen Kishun was the only thing protecting her right now as her Shun Shunrika followed her during her sprint. The Britannians couldn't see Orium's shield. They were, however, well aware that something was blocking their fire. Orium knew Ami rather well, or so she thought. She soon realized she was down a dead-end alleyway. Orium did know her current place of residence rather well though. The problem was that, in her panic, her sense of direction was muddled up in an attempt to lose the Britannian soldiers. Back to the wall, Orium kept her Santen Kishun projected in front of her to deflect enemy fire. When the enemy began to reload, she figured she could use Bringer Light to reach the top of the building above her and continue her escape. However, she didn't know if her shield would last that long. Orium was no coward, nor was she a complete pacifist. However, she didn't want to have to use her Katanzan Shun, her only weapon, or her Shitanko Shun, against the enemy soldiers, even if they were trying to kill her. These men were not hollows. Murderers or not, they were still living human beings, not rogue soul reapers, not even Arrancar, and certainly not Togobito. Orium couldn't bring herself to commit murder on men whose only crime was being born of a different nation and carrying out orders as soldiers. They probably had families, she figured. One shot, that was all it would take. One declaration to call Tsubaki and all of her problems would go away, but she wouldn't do it. She remembered when she killed in hell, all that blood. Sometimes, she still had nightmares. Orium pressed her back against the wall and cringed, holding her hands up defensively, and turned her head to the side, eyes closed. She could feel Santen Kishun breaking, waning. Orium was frightened. Any minute now, unless she heard the array of bullets stop, she was a goner. But then, she felt a sensation. It was strong, suffocating, but yet familiar and warm. The intense pressure caused Orium's knees to buckle for only a moment, as the sensation she was feeling was one she recognized and one she had grown accustomed to. In the next instant, without word or warning, a figure in black descended upon the crowd of soldiers, the intense wave of riot so from the figure's body causing them to die instantly just from being too close. Through the exploding corpses, garbed in black, a katana in his hand, Orium could see her savior. Ichigo. Garbed in Bankai, Ichigo had come to Orium's rescue. He had a lot of ground to cover, and he'd be damned if he was going to let a lack of speed stop him from getting where he needed to be. Thanks to his Bankai, he had made it to Ami in a single flash step from Mizuho. Ichigo looked towards her and put his blade along his shoulder before putting two fingers up by his forehead in a salute similar to his cousin, Shibukayan. Yo, he called out to Orium, long time no see. Orium saw Ichigo, stared at him. As always, she had been in trouble and he had come to save her. Although he had been miles away, a 3-hour drive, too far away for the other to sense their riot, so Ichigo had come to her rescue. Orium brought her hand up by her chest, fist clenched and her eyes watered. Ichigo became surprised. What's with that look? He stopped speaking when Orium ran forward and gave him a big hug. She had missed him. Ichigo sighed with content, dropped his sword and held on to her. You, Orium sniffed, crying, you did it again. Why you always save me when I'm in trouble? I'm just glad I got here in time, Ichigo told her. With the war going on, I wanted to make sure everyone was alright. Hiroshima's fallen, but if I know Ishida he's probably falling back this way. I sent out a text to everyone before I left that I want us to meet in Karakura town at the Urahara shop, but it failed to send to you, so I came to check up on you. I'm really happy you're not hurt. I'm fine, Orium said and then added after a pause, thanks to you. Orium. Ichigo called her name. She looked up at him and saw that his head was craned down towards her. Chigo, Orium said taking a pause after the first syllable. She leaned up and he leaned down and their lips met. They hadn't been together like this in quite a long time. It was refreshing for both. They broke away from each other. Ichigo looked at his, well actually he didn't know how to refer to Orium. Well, no, he had one thing he knew she was. She's the woman I love. Ichigo thought to himself. He picked his blade back up, knelt down and turned around. Here, he told her, climb on. We can make it to Karakura town faster if I'm carrying you. But. You're not heavy, Ichigo told her, laughing a little, now hurry it up. Okay. Orium nodded enthusiastically. She wrapped her arms tightly around Ichigo, grabbing onto her wrist with her other hand to secure herself and wrapped her legs around. Well, she didn't know how to refer to Ichigo either. She considered ex-boyfriend a little harsh. It's not like they had broken up or formally ended the relationship and Orium knew she had been faithful. And, like Ichigo, she knew one way to refer to him. He's the man I love. Now. Ichigo said, standing up, let's go. Then, with a burst of shunpo he began making his way to Karakura town. Mobile Brighton military base, the Capulet. Former Viceroy, and once again Major General, Meredith Myrdia was in charge of the Japanese war with Darlton calling the shots from behind the scenes. Cornelia was directly underneath her and the Capulet was already marching on Kyoto. Cornelia entered the main docking bay. Colonel Lee Britannia reporting in, she saluted to Meredith. Very good, Meredith told her. I have orders for you, something I think only you might be able to handle. I'm listening, Cornelia told her. It's about a place in the western Tokyo metropolis called Karakura town. Karakura town. Ichigo and Orium arrived at the Urahara shop. Karakura town had yet to be attacked by the Brightonians, but it was already feeling the effects. The once busy streets were shut in with people too afraid to go outside. Britannia was taking out any and all Japanese they could, civilians or otherwise, as they marched towards Tokyo. So, it wasn't odd that there was a note outside the Urahara shop in an envelope with the words, to Ichigo, written on it. Ichigo opened up the envelope and tore out the letter. Urahara's face stamp at the bottom was an indication it was from him. Ichigo proceeded to read the rest of the letter. Dear Ichigo. If you're reading this, then it means I'm not here anymore. The others and I have moved back into the Soul Society. Anohanasu Teiko is very accommodating and the Tremere family is housing any and all souls seeking refuge. In case you're wondering, I knew the attack of Britannia on Japan would come. I've known it for a long time. You can be mad at me all you want for not telling you, but I have my reasons. You have two things you can do. The Soul Society would be more than willing to accommodate you and your family and let you all come to the Soul Society. Your substitute Soul Reaper badge acts as a communicator as well. You can use it to contact Yuka Teiko if you feel like evading Britannia altogether and playing by our rules. However, if I know you won't do that. You're not the type of person to run. If that's the case, the Soul Society has no way of stopping you from fighting Britannia with everything you've got, you and your friends. However, if you do try to fight, we will not be area freezing Japan and therefore you will be fighting with limited power. That goes for the others as well. I would like to talk to you about this in person, but there are reasons I cannot, please understand. Do not call to ask questions, the Godai has no answers to give. If you call, it can only be a means of leaving the world of the living behind. The R&D department will be watching you. There is more going on here than you realize, but that's about all I can tell you. If you choose to fight, give it your all. If not, we'll come and get you. I advise retreating, but like I said, I know you won't. Sincerely, Urahara Kisuke. P.S. Feel free to use the underground facility in my shop as a home base. In fact, I recommend it. What is this? Ichigo just stared at the letter. I don't understand, Orium had been peeking over his shoulder. What does this mean? Ichigo lowered the letter in his arm. I don't know. He sighed and opened the door. The lights were off in the Urahara shop and the stock of candy and the decor were gone. The place was empty. What Ichigo and Orium didn't know, was that Urahara had enchanted his shop with a special Kido before leaving. Anyone who entered the shop between now and the death of the 99th Emperor of Britannia Lelich VI Britannia would have their Ryotsu restricted, like a Gentei Kaijo, if they had vice captain level or higher Ryotsu. The only way to remove it would be to apply for it, and the affected party, unless they had prior knowledge to this, did not know they had been affected. The only other way to remove the restriction was if Urahara, or another Kido master, removed it of their own volition. It was the perfect thing to handicap Ichigo and his companions. Ichigo, of course, had no idea of Lelich's involvement, or that was the reason that Urahara knew about the attack long enough in advance. He did however know, that Urahara was right about one thing: Ichigo wasn't going to take Britannia's attack lying down. Resigning Japan to his fate while he hid in the Soul Society wasn't fair to the countless people he had helped as police officer, and especially not fair to his former classmates, professors, and his partner Nagisa. And what about the rest of Japan and the people that his friends had made friends out of? Was he to resign them to their fate too? Ichigo knew he could not protect all of Japan. People would die, but he was going to make sure that he would save as many as he could. Wait here for me, he told Orium. Why? Where are you going? Orium asked him. I want to go see my folks. Karen and Yuzu are on summer break. I told Kon to go to my house and wait for me, Ichigo told her. I understand. Will you come back safely? Of course. Ichigo then took off to his family's clinic. He met up with Kon as the Mod Soul began huffing and puffing up the street. Karakura Town and Mizuho were closer together than the town and Ami, and given the time Ichigo had spent looking for Orium on top of how long he had spent at Urahara's, and he wasn't waiting for Kon for long. He walked into his house. Unii-chan. Yuzu nearly tackled Ichigo when she saw him walk in the door. His sister had gotten big since he last saw her. She was all grown up and, not that Ichigo was taking notice, but she had filled out rather nicely. To him though, she was still his little sister he had left crying when he boarded the train for Kyoto so many years ago. Yuzu's hair was longer now, reaching down to her mid-back. Karen was the same, and both sisters were home with the darker-haired twin hanging back. Good, Ichigo smiled as he pat Yuzu's head, you guys are safe. We won't be for long though. Britannia is on the warpath, Karen told Ichigo. But thankfully the Empire won't reach Karakura Town until at least tomorrow. Ichigo took a deep breath. That's good. Anyway, is Dad home? I need to talk with him. He's in the clinic readying to treat wounded soldiers. Director Ishida from the hospital on the other side of town wants our cooperation. Right, thanks, Ichigo said and entered his dad's office. Rather than assaulting him, as he used to, Ishine simply leaned back in his chair, put his hands behind his head and smiled. Well now, look who it is. If it isn't my one and only son, finally come home. You've really turned into quite the man, Ichigo. I've read some of the cases you've been involved in. I'm proud of you. Ishine looked at Ichigo's troubled expression and sat up, turned his chair clockwise towards Ichigo and leaned forward. Judging from the troubled look on your face though, I take it you aren't here just to get praise from your old man. What's up? I'm going to war, Ichigo told his dad. Say again. Ichigo took a deep breath. I'm going to fight Britannia. I'm going to use my Soul Reaper powers to fight them. Ishine looked at the serious look on his son's face. Urahara had told him partly about his plan. Ishine, however, wished to act as though he was in the dark about the whole thing. After all, it wasn't like he could do anything. Ichigo was 25 years old now. Ishine was neither responsible for him nor in charge of him. You came here just to tell me this. Don't tell Karen and Yuzo, okay? By the way, Ichigo removed a green sphere from his pocket and placed it in his dad's hand. Hang on to him for me, would you? You're giving me your Jikengan. I don't plan on leaving soul form, and my body will be safe underneath Urahara's basement. Ishine raised his palm higher. Don't you think you should at least say goodbye to him? He can hear us, you know. Why say goodbye? It's not like I plan on dying, Ichigo said with a smirk. You'll be gone for a long time though, Ishine said, and who knows, you may not want to take him back when you're all done. He may not have been the most reliable partner, but don't you think you owe him at least something? Ichigo realized his dad was right and took Kon back for a moment. Kon. He said to the green pill, I know you can't move or talk to me right now, but right now, all I want you to do is listen, so that's fine. Like my dad said, if you heard him, you may have driven me crazy, but you've been good for me. Looking back, I don't think I would have been well off with any other Jikengan. I'm glad I had you. If I don't come back for you, know that it's not because I don't like you. Are you trying to make me cry, idiot? Kon asked in his mind. If he had eyes they'd be wet. If I don't come back, if this is the last time I hold your pill in my hand, I just want you to know that you aren't damaged goods and behave for the next Soul Reaper that uses you. Ichigo then handed Kon back to Ishine. Well, I'm off. Don't guy dying on me, boy. Remember, you die in soul form and that's it, game over. No second chances and no do-overs. You ain't coming back. I know, Ichigo told Ishine. Just do me and your mother proud and know that, if I could, I'd be out there helping you, Ishine said and smiled. This may not be where I was born, but this is my home too now. Thanks Dad, Ichigo said before turning around to take off. He made it to the Urahara shop where Tatsuki had turned on the TV in Urahara's place, one of the few things the shopkeeper left behind. There was a news story going on about the war and the atrocities being reported after just one day. Ichigo was catching the tail end of the report and, as he walked into the room, Tatsuki shut off the TV. She, Chad, Kigo, Uryu, Yoshino and Orium were all gathered on the floor. How horrible, Orium cringed. They have no right to do this. Kigo glared. What choice do we have? Yoshino asked. Outside the army we are but harmless civilians. Without our spiritual power we are powerless to stop them. Everybody in the basement. The others turned to see Ichigo glaring at the TV as though he was trying to destroy it with his very stare. Ichi. Now. The crime fighter interrupted his childhood friend. In Urahara's basement everyone stood around in a circle, glances sent towards Ichigo. They all expected him to speak. What's going on, Ichigo? What's the deal, man? Yes, what is your reasoning for wanting us all down here? Yoshino inquired. When Her Late Majesty came to Japan to eliminate terrorists that were hiding out here, I asked Kendra, in private, what it is she believed I would do or should do if the situation we now faced ever happened. And? What did she say? Tatsuki asked. I want everyone to listen to me, very carefully. Britannia thinks they can just waltz in and take what they want. More important than the Sakuradite, they think they can just waltz in here and take our homes, our families, our life, liberty, and property. Well, his scowl twitched deeper, we are not going to let them have it. We're going to fight back. He undid his tie and tossed his suit jacket to the ground. We're going to take this fight to the Britannians. He dug his hand into his right-hand pocket and whipped out his substitute Soul Reaper badge. We'll show them what it means to invade Japan. I don't care if they want the Sakuradite, or a giant hula hoop, we are not going to let them have it. What we will let them have is a tank of spilled blood mailed back to the capital with a note that says go fuck yourself. Who's with me? Let me get this straight, Tatsuki crinkled her brow in confusion, you want us to use our powers and fight the Britannians with full force. Ichigo slammed his badge into his chest and let his body fall to the ground. He then glared at Tatsuki. That is exactly what I'm saying. Then count me in, Tatsuki said and began putting on a pair of familiar fingerless gloves. I'm not exactly about to surrender what is rightfully ours to a foreign nation. I'll fight too, Chad nodded his head. The Brighton Neons have marked themselves as our enemies. It is my pride as a Quincy to protect what I hold sacred against anyone I mark an enemy, Uriah said, pushing up his glasses. I've lost too many homes to too many things, Yoshino spoke up, I cast my lot in with you. I'll fight. I don't know how much help I'll be, but I will do my best to help, Orium stated. And what about you, Kigo? Ichigo asked. Me. The guitarist pointed to himself. Yeah, you're part of this group too, aren't you? Ichigo asked. What? Are you waiting for a formal invitation? Tatsuki snarked. Get on in here, you dumbass. Guys, Kigo was moved. After what happened with the Fullbringers, Kigo didn't know if his friends would want him around. Sure, Ichigo had invited him out here, but Kigo didn't know that meant he wanted to take up arms alongside him. In the battle with Aizen, Kigo and Yoshino had to stay back because they were out of their league. It had been 10 years and Kigo had been honing his skills. His body bristled and trembled with his excitement as he held his fists by his chest. Then he thrust one arm up into the air and shouted with glee. Ah yeah. Fighting Britannia. This is going to be awesome. Count me in. Kigo extended his arm towards the center of the circle. Yoshino extended her right arm forward, Uriah did the same. Holding her hairpins, Orium extended her arm out as well. Tatsuki and Chad extended their arms out and Ichigo gently tapped the flat end of his blade over the arms of his companions. Before we were simple civilians, but now we take up arms using the powers we were granted by fate to protect what it is we want to protect. We cannot save all of Japan, destroying Britannia may seem impossible just the 7 of us, but we will fight. If fate is a milestone we are the grist, but there is something we can do. We have the strength we have earned and lived with that some of us were even born with. We will not be able to protect everyone, and though we do not all have blades in the literal sense, we have them metaphorically. And with these blades and the strength we possess, we will take up arms against Britannia, and shatter fate. Go team! Orium exclaimed. It begins and ends with us, Tatsuki sneered. Karakura 7 all the way! Kigo exclaimed, giving the group a name. Though our souls and bodies are different we carry the same banner. Even if we are different people, somehow, someway, we are one, Uriah stated. Chad simply nodded his head in agreement. Let us go. I am eager to take to the battlefield for a cause I know is worth fighting for. Then after me, Ichigo said and towards the ladder as fast as he could to exit out. Saigo no Kataki no Ryu. Tatsuki took off with her wings. Uriah created a Reishi surfboard and zipped away. Greatest guitar ever. Balancing on his guitar, Kigo zipped across the basement to the ladder. Zejdike, Gerda. Yoshino unleashed her doll. It took the form of a fiery djinn. Gerda, take my friend and I here to the surface. It's time to go to battle. Yes, I understand. Gerda took Yoshino and Orium in either arm and carried them. Chad took off on his own using simple Sonido level speed. The Capulet. You expect me to believe in such things? Cornelia asked Meredith. The Major General had just finished explaining to Cornelia that Karakura Town was rumored to be a place where the supernatural was rumored to occur based on its reputation. There were idiots like Don Kanonji who made the declaration of spirits existing in Karakura Town, and many blog entries of spiritual sightings were all over the internet. You expect me to believe the Falkland incident was anything normal too? Meredith returned sharply. Cornelia held her tongue. That's what I thought. Although Meredith herself was without spiritual power, she was not so close-minded that the possibilities of the unexplainable. All that required was an explanation, even if it wasn't a very scientific one. Meredith's belief was that something strange happened in the Falkland Islands, and this similar phenomenon was regular in Karakura Town. Since Cornelia was the only operative with any skill of dealing with the strange and bizarre, it would be her job to take control of Karakura Town in its entirety. Take one of the battalions under your command and march on the town from here. Major General, Cornelia saluted to show her respect despite her questioning. That's 1,300 men to take care of one town. Are so many men required? We need to march in that direction anyway. Best you be prepared than for you to be left alone. Also there are still more troops out of the 15,000 men and women at my disposal, and there are still 1 million men and women in the entire Brighton army. No matter what kind of resistance is lurking in that town, I want it eliminated. What if you're wrong? If I'm wrong, the Japanese will be raising a white flag by the end of the week. You have your orders, go. Yes ma'am, right away ma'am. Cornelia bowed out and prepared to leave. And Colonel, Meredith called just before she left. Yes. Cornelia turned in Meredith's direction. The blonde was smiling at her. Thank you. For what? For getting rid of the alliance. I owe you a debt that I can never repay. Joanne, if she were here now. I understand, thank you Major General, Cornelia said with a smile before hardening herself. I'll be going now. Godspeed and good luck to you Colonel Lee Britannia. I have a gut feeling you'll need it. Karakura town. Ichigo and the others stood outside the Urahara shop in a deserted district. So are we just going to stand here or are we going to attack? Tatsuki asked. These are soldiers, not hollows. We can't sense them like we normally do with our enemies. However, even with that said, they haven't marched on this city yet, Ichigo stated. He's right, Uriah said, but they'll be here soon. There are massive amounts of spirit ribbons coming from the west. ETA? Ichigo asked. My guess? 5 hours. 5 hours? But the broadcast said tomorrow, Yoshino said with surprise. The broadcast has no idea how to do a proper time estimate, or realize what we're up against, Uriah stated. I made my way to Karakura town the moment I saw troops dropping down. I knew I'd have to join up with all of you if I wanted to fight. However, I've seen things. What's that mean exactly? Tatsuki asked. The Brightonians have a new weapon. It's a gigantic mech like something straight out of a sci-fi anime that they call a nightmare frame. Giant mechs, big hoop, Ichigo rolled his eyes up. There's another thing, Uriah said. These last several years, ever since the incident with Kurosaka-san's hollow getting loose, I've been doing some intensive research. What kind of research? Orium asked. And what does my hollow have to do with it? Ichigo asked. You were shot by her ladyship, the Empress, and it pierced right through your hollow form's arrow. I couldn't help but figure how odd that was. It was only after making several trips to the scene that I discovered traces of sakuradite powder, and so I conducted experiments, Uriah said, pushing in his glasses, and I've discovered something that will be important to us all. And that is? Kigo asked. Whereas Sekiseki acts as the repellent of all Reishi and Ryatsu-based fighting, sakuradite is the best penetrator. Its unique energy wavelength can pierce right through our Ryatsu without any trouble at all. And, since nightmare frames are powered by sakuradite, the wavelength courses through the metal hulls, which will make our attacks less effective on their constructs. That's not exactly good, Ichigo thought to himself. It gets worse, Uriah told him. Sakuradite's anti-spirit wavelength is caused by a fluctuation in the core of its sediment, which by its composition to its structure allows it to. In Japanese please, Ichigo stressed. Basically, sakuradite is just another form of solidified reishi, Uriah concluded. Are you serious? Ichigo asked, in awe. I wouldn't lie about something so severe to this mission. However, if we're lucky, the enemies we're fighting might not know enough use that against us. I'd advise us all to proceed with caution nonetheless though. Well, let's say we meet them at their approach then. Ichigo asked. No, a head-on confrontation won't work, Uriah told Ichigo. We should properly plan out a tactical procedure and... Give me a break. Ichigo said, stepping forward to the front of the group. These are humans without any spiritual pressure. The last batch couldn't even stand the weight of my Bankai's Ryatsu. This will be a massacre. Ichigo's right. There's no reason to hold back against these guys. If we go all out we'll kick their asses, Tatsuki grinned. Hold on, Ichigo, you killed a few soldiers? Chad asked him. Ichigo's scowl hardened. I did. And I don't regret it either. Now even Tatsuki had to be shocked. Hold on, you don't regret taking innocent lives? Innocent? That word hardly has any meaning to me. Human they are, innocent they are not. I did what I had to do to protect Orium. These soldiers fight with no honor. They murder civilians in the streets and they're destroying the country. I don't have any mercy for people like that, Ichigo said and extended his sword forward. Bankai. Ichigo emerged in his Zanpakuto's ultimate form. We cannot be afraid to kill. He swung his sword out at his side. Britannia must get the message that we are not to be trifled with. This is our home and we are going to protect it until the bitter end. Now let's go. He took off with a burst of Shunpo to a suspension bridge in the town and stood atop one of the archways. He could see the dust cloud of the approaching troops from way off in the distance. Come and draw your last breath. You bastards will regret the day you walked into my home turf. From within her nightmare frame, hanging in the middle of her army, Cornelia and her troops began marching on Karakura town. Colonel Lee Britannia, a woman with short, trimmed black hair, brushed to the right side with blue eyes and a scar across her nose appeared on Cornelia's onboard computer. This is Colonel Ada Hawk of the Britannian Air Force. The Ibaraka Prefecture has been taken. Major General Lionel Macbeth has requested that my unit provide cover for you should you need it. I could certainly use the help, Colonel, thank you. Cornelia was suddenly interrupted by another on-screen image. This one was a man with blonde, unkempt hair with so many cowlicks you'd think a cow actually licked it. Colonel Lee Britannia, my name is Captain Jason Shepard of the Britannian Navy. I've been asked by Rear Admiral Cassandra Hecate to lead as many ships as I can up the Onos and Karasu rivers. Something's not right here. Cornelia thought to herself. She contacted her commanding officer. Major General Mirdia. I take no chances, Cornelia. Records of an inexplicable sonic boom between Mizuho, Tokyo Metropolis, and Ami, Ibaraka Prefecture were recorded by scanners and the same from there to Karakura town. Whatever is in that town is dangerous and too fast to be picked up by the human eye. As I said, I don't take chances, Colonel Lee Britannia, and neither does His Majesty. We have 3 major generals commanding this assault. That's manpower of 45,000 troops. We can easily afford 3 battalions of troops to take care of a small enigmatic town. You focus on your mission, Colonel. Leave the rest of the war to the rest of us. Yes, ma'am, that was going to be the last, Cornelia said on that statement. Orders, ma'am. Shepard said to Cornelia, we've been told that you would be leading this mission. Cornelia did some thinking. Hawk, take your troops and try to get a perfect bird's eye view of the area. Shoot anything that moves not in a Britannian uniform. Swoop down low and pull up sharply if you need a better look. However, wait for my signal before opening any sort of fire for now. Affirmative. Ready and awaiting. I will let you know when my troops are in position, Hawk told her. Shepard, Cornelia addressed the naval captain, create a barricade along the rivers. Other than that, same orders as Hawk. Understood. Cornelia then addressed her own subordinate, Lieutenant Colonel Eda McFarland. Lieutenant Colonel. Yes, Colonel Lee Britannia. Take half of the battalion and circle around towards the north, then split your unit and have half of it make their way east of the town. I want these people boxed in, Cornelia ordered. Yes, Your Highness. It's all reliant on me now, Cornelia thought to herself. Looking out over the approaching army, standing atop the bridge, Ichigo thought to himself. This will be the greatest battle I've ever faced. Not because of the strength of my enemy, but because of the importance of this battle and what rides on it. Cornelia and Ichigo were thinking on similar threads. For my family. For my friends. I shall not falter. Cornelia declared. I am. My country's greatest hope. To be continued. Chapter 149, Ichigo vs Cornelia, The Sacrifice. August 12, 2010 ATB. Shortly after midnight. On board the Capulet. Nothing could have prepared Cornelia for the carnage she faced earlier today. She had sent all forces to attack and then, In the blink of an eye, every aircraft was wiped out in seconds by great balls of fire. Her naval ships were blasted to pieces by an energy blast, superior in might to even her own spiritual powers. Soldiers were shot down on sight by arrows of blue light. Even the mass-produced night Marrays were diced to pieces and by a show of force that couldn't even be seen. Cornelia retreated with what was left of her army, and she was surprised that she had been allowed to retreat. She had less than 500 soldiers left. From 3,900 to 500 in less than a few hours' time. It was unbelievable, completely impossible, and physically inconceivable. And yet it happened, and so many soldiers were dead. No wounded to collect, just a mountain of corpses and the blood, all of the blood and smoldering flesh. She stood in the control room with Meredith, in a complete cold sweat panic. Meredith, on the other hand, wasn't the least bit fazed. She had a feeling she was working against forces beyond her imagination and, based on the data coming back to her mobile base, she was right, and she and Cornelia could hardly believe their eyes. A half-Mexican, a rock star wannabe, a woman constantly followed by a creature that was on fire, a long-haired woman in white, a woman with reddish armor, raven-colored hair and wings, and a young man wearing glasses and also wearing white had devastated almost all of the troops Cornelia had gone into battle with. No, that wasn't accurate. There was a seventh, but he or she wasn't being picked up on camera. However, the fact spheres of the nightmare frames did indicate that there was a presence in the vicinity. It wasn't showing up on the infrared or ultraviolet scans, but the fact sphere was reading out a high concentration of energy similar to that of sakuradite, and that was in all cases. Of course, the scanners had no way of differentiating between sakuradite and Ryotsu. There are only 7 of them. How did they defeat so many so fast? It doesn't make any sense. Cornelia was shaken to her very core. Experienced in this kind of thing or not, even she hadn't expected so much devastation. It appears I miscalculated, Meredith said meticulously. Cornelia slammed her left fist on the navigation deck. How can you just stand there and act so calm? I told you, we have many troops. The Emperor knew that Japan would pose a problem. He's known it for a long time now. What we could be dealing with are sakuradite-powered super soldiers. For an explanation of one without my experiences, that is a pretty good theory. Still, that doesn't exactly help morale. No, it doesn't, but there are ways around such things. Surely even you know that. Cornelia saluted, knowing exactly what Meredith was getting at. Understood, I'll direct the troops immediately. Good, report to me when your objective is complete. August 18th. For 6 days now Ichigo and his friends had been forced to fight the invading Brighton-Neans, but they could not replenish their stamina and were becoming famished. What little they had hoarded after their first victory was now becoming too much worth the risk to step outside. Kigo was out of commission, having been gunned down while he was scouting for food. Orium had healed him right up, but it would look weird for him to go back out after wounds like that. His large hunger and the lack of regenerating Ryotsu forced him to retreat when he was cut off by Brighton-Nean soldiers guarding the nearest marketplace. The lack of regeneration was tough on everyone. Ryotsu expelled their life energy after a while, and so they were slowly draining themselves dry, feeling incredibly fatigued and incredibly hungry. Tatsuki was the first one to burn out, and that was 3 days ago. Her attacks took too much out of her, and by the end of the 3rd day she could barely surround herself in fire. Kaibun had to bail her out 3 times, and now even the spirit herself was tuckered out. The only 2 people not feeling the effects of hunger were Ichigo and Yoshino. Yoshino was able to feed off the corpses of their enemies. Not only was she able to consistently get stronger from these feedings, but it also replenished her stockpile. She simply had to be careful so as not to be found while hunting for corpses. Ichigo, while he wasn't tired or fatigued, knew there was something wrong with him. He was relying on his mask more and more, as though his Bankai constantly was becoming not enough. He had already absorbed almost all of the free-flowing Reishi Karakura town had to offer to replenish his Bankai. He was slowly running out of steam. He wasn't, however, about to give up just yet. His friends were counting on him. They needed him to be strong. August 21st. As a new day dawned, Cornelia stood on board the lookout deck of the Capulet, now stationed at the northwest city limits of Karakura town. All of the civilians had moved on to the metropolis central. What was left of the battalions, except for less than half of the men under Cornelia's command, had moved on and were planning on taking the capital. The advanced technology of the nightmare frames was making this war a cinch. With any luck, Cornelia could rescue her half-siblings and be home in time for Yuffie's birthday. However, this waiting game was getting on her nerves. Karakara town, now but a broken, ruined wasteland of destruction, was all that stood between the goddess of victory and victory itself. She was almost certain resistance was starting to wane. Only 2 of her enemies were still fighting her head-on. She figured the remaining fighters must have starved to death by now. Cornelia was only winning, of course, because Ichigo was too worried about his friends to go charging beyond his own hometown. He had successfully helped Yuzuru, Karen, and his dad retreat from Karakara town eastward towards Tokyo Central. Now Karakara town was completely devoid of people except for him and his friends. From all the corpses she had been eating, Yoshino was much stronger than him. In fact, she had devoured no less than 5,000 human corpses. Even with the Gentai Kaijo-like restriction on her, Yoshino's Ryutsu was radiating fiercely with that of a captain's unrestricted Ryutsu. Gerda, because of all of the added Reishi, now took the form of a fiery giant rather than a floating fire genie. Yoshino was cleaving enemies down faster than even Ichigo could with her doll. Ichigo felt lucky that she was on his side. The only reason he and his friends hadn't starved to death was because Orium's Soten Kishun was rejecting the fate of her friend's hunger, and to keep her strength up, Ichigo and Yoshino would loot Brighton Neon corpses of rations. Cornelia was picking up on this, and when she saw the floating bread she knew that one of those invisible warriors was one of her opponents. She somehow had to get out on the battlefield to properly confirm her theory. What to do? She wondered. I can't just go in there without a plan. Meredith had left the Capulet in Cornelia's care. The Major General had to continue finishing war plans to fully take the rest of the country. Karakara town was completely cut off from the rest of the country, but where there was resistance to be had, Britannia intended to strike it down before declaring victory. As a matter of fact, the Karakara mess was the only reason Japan was holding out. Despite the victory of Todokyo's hero several days earlier, he and his men had been forced to give up their position and fall back after the next battle. So, instead of charging through the town and heading west for Tokyo, the Army, Air Force, and Navy had to carefully move around the town in order to make progress, creating ridiculous delay and irritation. It was making Cornelia apprehensive. With every day that clicked by, that was another day she didn't have Lelich and Nunnally's warm bodies safely wrapped in her arms. Taking a deep breath, Cornelia shut off the recordings and sat down to work. She began drafting a plan. She needed to come up with some sort of way to eliminate at least one of her enemies, ultimately deciding upon the woman constantly necking corpses. Cornelia, much like Urayu, had done experiments on Sakuradite. However, unlike Urayu, who knew the relationship between Sakuradite and Ryutsu as fact, Cornelia had yet to test the theory in action. Would it work? Could she take the risk? She had to find that out, and she had to find it out sooner rather than later. Preparations had to be made. Cornelia had a war to win. August 27th. Upon returning to the Urahara shop, another wave of Brighton Neons repelled. Ichigo slumped down against a rock, panting heavily. He didn't know how much longer he and his friends could keep this up. Britannia hadn't won yet. Sure, the tide had turned completely against their favor, but eventually Britannia would have to stop wasting troops on them to get them to stop fighting back. After that, Ichigo and his friends could spread out, gather more rations, and take to the offensive. Urayu had been fiddling with an enemy radio and had been picking up signals every now and again. From the sound of it, Britannia's total soldier strength was 45,000 soldiers, plus 3 commanders, 2 major generals and a rear admiral. Urayu had been doing a number crunch and had approximated that between all 7 of them, the death total on Britannia's side was about 20,000 of their troops, but only because 213 of them had been killed by Japanese soldiers, most of which were during the battle in Japan's favor led by Todokyo's hero. The Japanese were down to less than half that many men. Morale was good even if the majority of casualties by Britannia was caused by Ichigo and his companions. Orium shifted her focus to Ichigo and knelt down at his side. "Are you all right?" Ichigo panted heavily. I've been better. You should probably get some sleep, Yoshino told him. You're too fatigued to go another round. Get some sleep, try to relax. Gerda and I can handle Britannia at least for one day. You just rest up. And no, Ichigo got to his feet only to drop to his knees almost immediately. He had been in Bankai mode for weeks on end now. It was a feat only Luska Stefan and Lamprouje Lelich could pull off, but definitely not for this long. Ichigo. Orium reached towards him to comfort him. You're of no help to anyone, least of all me, like that Ichigo. Take a breather. Gerda, come. Yes, I understand, the demonic night hellspawn fire creature followed after her. Gerda now stood at the size of a nightmare frame, looking to be composed completely of bubbling magma, lava, and regular fire. He had bulky arms and legs like that of a nomadic giant. He was wearing a plate of armor over his chest area and his head had goat-like horn, magma constructs growing above and behind his head, and he also had glowing white eyes. He was a force to be reckoned with, as much as Yoshino's martial art skills were increasing due to the increase in her own Ryutsu. Right now Yoshino was the team's strongest asset. If anyone could turn the tide single-handedly, it would have to be her. She was the only one whose strength, under the current circumstances, was limitless. Yoshino. Uriah walked up to her as she made for the ladder. He was clutching his stomach as if that was supposed to minimize the hungry feeling in his body. Uriah, Yoshino smiled at him. Please, be careful, Uriah told her. Aren't I always? Yoshino asked him. You're going off alone. You and Ichigo have always watched out for each other. I don't know how safe this is, if at all. Please come back safely to us. You're always so concerned about me, Yoshino smiled. I'm glad I've had someone like you, Uriah, to watch over me all this time. You've been a true friend. Is that all I've been? Just a friend? Uriah asked, slightly irritated. Yoshino looked to the side. It has to be like that. I'm a Bount and you're a Quincy. We shouldn't. Yoshino, Uriah stepped towards her and clasped her hands with his. You've always been a companion first and a Bount second. It doesn't matter to me what you are. You started off as my friend. What happened to right before I set off to the Soul Society when you stayed behind? We never followed up on that. And all you did was confuse my friends by being secretive about it. What happened to the Soma Yoshino I left behind, who said she would wait for me, who wanted to be with me? Because that doesn't feel like the Soma Yoshino I'm talking to now. Uriah, May I kiss you, like that one time? Yoshino flushed a little. I guess. Uriah drew her in close and passionately kissed Yoshino. Her soft lips were divine to his senses. They grabbed each other's shoulders. They held on for a long time. Yoshino touched her fingers to her lips. How long? If there was a single regret I had since moving away, it was that I was leaving you behind. You were a true friend up to a certain point, but I've always believed there was something more between us. I want to close that distance, Yoshino. I'm sorry, Yoshino said to Uriah, I just can't. What would people say? I'm a Bount. You're a Quincy. Our people are naturally enemies. If we mated, you could be held responsible for bringing back a great threat, and who could say what our children would inherit? We would cross that bridge when we came to it. Uriah was growing increasingly frustrated. Yoshino looked down at the ground, hiding her eyes from Uriah, but she was smiling. Say, Uriah, if we were born in the same timeline, would you still feel this way about me? If you were the same woman I've known you to be, it would only be inevitable once we came in contact with each other. Even if we were shunned by those around us. Even if I had an arranged marriage to another Quincy. Uriah took it one step further. Yoshino looked at Uriah with misty eyes. Thank you, Uriah. With that the Bount woman turned to leave. I have no regrets. Yoshino emerged from the Urahara shop and made her way southwest. It was the middle of the night, 10 p.m. She saw the hot lights coming towards her. She could see the soldiers making their way towards her. Cornelia had amassed 300 of her remaining 500 troops to face down Yoshino, 50 nightmare units, 100 snipers, 20 shock troops, 100 assault and shotgun riflemen and 15 tanks, 2 soldiers to a tank. Yoshino watched the oncoming horde with gusto, standing in the back, letting her doll do the work. Gerda, fireballs. Yes, I understand. Great balls of fire filled into Gerda's hands and he threw the hot spheres at the enemy troops, taking out a majority of the infantry and all but 2 of the shock troops. A tank rolled up upon the landscape to which Gerda prepared another fireball and threw it, blowing it up. 2 more took its place and fired 2 blasts at Gerda. One tank was loaded with sakuradite shells, the other one normal rounds, and Cornelia was collecting all of the data. She watched as the normal round dissolved as it reached into Gerda's personal space, but the sakuradite kept going and pierced right into Gerda's shoulder and ignited, creating a hole in his arm that nearly tore it off, but the flowing magma reformed itself. Yes. Cornelia was elated. It works. I was right. Gerda, what happened? Yoshino asked him. Something pierced my Ryotsu completely. I'm fine. Yuryu, they've caught on. What do we? Yoshino stopped thinking when she noticed a red light aimed at her stomach. She barely had time to dodge the incoming sniper bullet aimed at her. She dropped from her vantage point and began taking to the battlefield herself. Gerda, freeform. Yes, I understand. Yoshino rushed off into battle to find an enemy soldier as she and Gerda began fighting separately from each other. Yoshino dodged incoming enemy fire from sniper units as she advanced on the source of the shots from the source of the sound generated by the shot. She managed to find 10 snipers and killed them by using her muscles to break their bones and necks, but the incoming fire left her no time to feast upon their corpses. You'll be getting no nourishment this battle, my little vampire. Cornelia smiled cruelly at Yoshino's dilemma. She had cameras installed in the helmets of all of her troops before sending them out into battle. She needed all the data in order to take care of her final opponent, which, from the looks of things, the invisible warrior wasn't anywhere to be found. This is my chance. If I can take her out, I'll have only one enemy left to fight. Gerda grabbed a tank, spun it around and chucked it at 2 more, they all blew up. He then extended his arm forward, grabbed a shock troop, igniting him on fire and tossed him away, destroying the man and a nearby female sniper. All nightmare troops advance. Take out that fiery gargantuan. Cornelia declared. The nightmare rays advanced on Gerda. With his great balls of fire, 5 were destroyed but 7 more then fired their Harkins and pierced right through his Ryotsu. The Harkins punched through his chest armor and impacted on the ground. Gerda moved to yank his enemies forward, but he only managed to whip 3 around like a kite. The other 4 restricted his movement and that allowed 6 more nightmare frames, equipped with sakuradite ammo, to surround him. 5 were carrying assault rifles and 1 had a rocket launcher. Fire at will. Cornelia declared. Yoshino noticed it as she destroyed her 15th sniper unit after the initial 10 when Gerda was blasted to pieces. The sakuradite ammo and the rockets decimated him. Captain class spiritual pressure meant nothing when it could be bypassed. Gerda's Ryotsu was fading. Gerda. Yoshio began making her way towards the doll to reach him, but she would never make it. Gerda, no. You can't die on me. Not now. We're so close. Yoshino grit her fists and surged her Ryotsu before she did the only thing she could think to do. She took control of all of Gerda's Reishi and formed it upon herself, merging with Gerda. She was encased in hardened magma, her hair now on fire. She could even fly now. Don't worry Gerda, I'm with you. Together we'll win for sure. With a fierce battle cry, Yoshino tore after her enemies with fierce determination. With her newfound, combined strength, she tore through a nightmare frame like it wasn't even there, flying across the air as though she was merely swimming. Bullets from the remaining infantry fired down upon her, but Yoshino dodged the incoming fire and swooped down upon them, incinerating them all with a constant stream of fire. With the power coursing through her, Yoshino destroyed all of the tanks with ease. Damn it, where did all this power come from? Cornelia wondered to herself, biting her thumbnail through her glove. She's moving too fast for me to focus on her. Cornelia continued to observe the battle, wondering what to do. With just an extension of her palm, Yoshino was ripping through the Knight Mares and tanks like they were merely made out of tissue paper. Her superior Captain Class Ryotsu was the greatest chance Ichigo and his friends had at winning now. If she could keep this up, it would all be over. Cornelia watched Yoshino and then thought of a tactic. All sniper units, change your vantage points, move cautiously and hold your fire. Repeat, hold your fire. Cornelia's troops moved in silence as her Knight Mares and tanks were torn apart. She had about 50 men left on that battlefield from the initial 300. She had to take out Yoshino and she had to do it now. Yoshino was having a hard time locating the snipers. They didn't have Ryotsu and she couldn't spot them with ease in the middle of the night like the tanks and the nightmare frames. They were the only units left. All of the shock troops were gone, Knight Mares destroyed, tanks were scrap metal. Yoshino used her hearing to try and pick something up, but the roaring flames in her ear from her merged form made that rather difficult. She lowered her altitude, lest she give her attackers free shots. "Colonel," a soldier radioed to Cornelia, "I have the target in my crosshairs, shall I fire?" "No, draw her presence." "But..." "Soldier, someone needs to make a last sacrifice. Draw her fire. If you can draw her towards you, I'll order the others to fire on her. 49 shots should be more than sufficient." "I understand, tell my fiancée I loved her." "I will do it," Cornelia told her sniper. "All soldiers listen, a single shot is going to be sent out. Follow the target when the shot passes by her and then fire on her location when she goes for the kill." The brave soldier, whose name would be forgotten by history, took aim with his weapon and fired just over Yoshino's right shoulder. As expected, Yoshino fell for Cornelia's trap hook, line, and sinker. As she rushed forward, all of the other soldiers fired upon her after she made the kill blow. Yoshino's reaction time was only good enough to dodge about half of the shots aimed at her. Some grazed her, others were direct hits. Her bond with Gerda shattered from the damage dealt and she collapsed on the ground. "That'll do, troops, report to base." "This job isn't finished yet." "Yes, Your Highness." The troops all began to leave. Yoshino, however, though having taken no less than 23 sniper shots and hit hard concrete, was still alive, but barely. She picked herself up, blood flowing out from her immensely, and dragged herself along the smashed-up concrete, only to fall forward after only having taken 3 steps with both legs. She turned over onto her back and looked up at the sky. It was a clear night. Yoshino could see the stars, but the moon was outside her viewpoint. She was starting to choke on the blood. One of the bullets had punctured a vital artery. She didn't know how long she would last, but she wouldn't last long and she couldn't move. She made one last effort and only managed to turn back over onto her stomach, crawl forward and extend her broken arm out to the ground. Her other hand clutched her bleeding stomach. The cool night air blew through her hair as warm blood dripped down her face. Things began to grow dark for Yoshino. She knew this was it, but she was smiling. In her mind, she was trying to create a lasting, happy thought to cling to. Her mind melded a fantasy she had envisioned in the last few years, which never came to be, which she thought never should be. She was standing at an altar in a wedding dress, being married to Urayu. He told her she looked lovely, and soon Yoshino found herself with child and eventually a mother. "In another time and in another life, that is what I wish could be true. Urayu, these years spent with you and your friends, I felt like I was really living." Tears exited her eyes and mingled with the blood. "Thank you, Urayu, for everything. Goodbye." September 1st. When Yoshino did not return, Urayu assumed the worst. When Ichigo had recovered a little bit, he went out and searched. When he found Yoshino, she was beyond the point of return. Her soul was gone from her body. If Orium rejected her fate now, she would bring back nothing more than an empty shell. Although she had not the power to go back out and fight, Urayu asked Tatsuki if she would honor Yoshino by burning her body upon an altar, and if the others would help him give Yoshino a proper burial in the ground beneath the shop. Despite being hungry beyond their wildest imaginations, only not going crazy thanks to Orium, everyone pitched in to honor Urayu's request. After her body was cremated and the woman was dead and buried in the ground, the group gave Urayu some time to himself. He looked at the makeshift grave in anguish. He desperately wanted to break down, but he didn't want to appear weak. There would be time for grieving after the war. Uriah sat on his knees with an arm outstretched on the chiseled tombstone. Uriah didn't break down, but tears did escape and stained his glasses as they fell. He felt as if a knife had been wedged deep into his chest. It was so deep that the pain overrode his hunger, for the moment. Britannia had taken from him the only woman he had loved in this world. She was born a demon, but to Uriah she was like an angel. Uriah sucked back the tears and stood up. He decided to perform a Quincy prayer for Yoshino's peace. He crossed his right arm across to his left shoulder and then touched his right shoulder. He crossed back to the center and then down towards his pelvis before coming up to his chin. Dear God, one of your children has been cast down before her prime. She was a good soul, and though she was not one of yours, please let her soul not be stained where she will go. Let her stay in the soul society be one of mirth and merriment. If she is not bound for there, then wherever she may go, let your light guide her, and let us say, Amen. Ichigo and the others looked over to where Uriah was standing. Is he going to be okay? Kigo asked. The guy just lost someone really close to him. What would you do if your sister died? Tatsuki snapped. Before, or after I stopped laughing? Kigo asked, showing his displeasure towards his sibling and in an attempt to lighten the situation. Right, very creepy, forget I asked. Is it really so terrible? I mean, won't Soma-san just show up in the Soul Society? Not every soul goes to the Soul Society. There's no telling what Yoshino did before she met us, or if bounce are similar to humans at all. And even if she did go to the Soul Society, it's unlikely that we could ever find her in our lifetime. That's what Sensei taught me, anyway, Tatsuki said. Yoshino was a good person, though. She liked fruit bats, Chad said, showing his soft side for cute animals. This isn't the end, you know. Ichigo knew Britannia would be back, and when they did it would be him they would be looking for. He was in no rush to go back out there though. He had to conserve his power. 9 days, he figured. In 9 days, he glanced down at Tensou Zanjutsu. I should have recovered enough to make one last assault on Britannia's forces. If I cannot push them back here, then we are finished. Ichiorium reached out to Ichigo, but Tatsuki pushed her hand down. Best give him his space. When something like this happens, Ichigo just needs to be left alone. Orium agreed. She could sense Ichigo's pain and depressed determination. Yoshino had died because he wasn't strong enough, in his mind anyway. Uriah certainly didn't blame Ichigo, he blamed Britannia, but Ichigo was about to redouble his efforts and become stronger. Once this war was over, he would make sure he would not lose another friend. September 3rd. Since Yoshino's death, Cornelia had been reviewing the data from the battle. She knew that the Sakuradite had worked. Now she just had to figure how to deal with her enemy that wasn't showing up on camera and only registered as an energy signature anomaly. Ichigo, though she did not know him by name, was Cornelia's only remaining enemy. He and Yoshino had been going it by themselves for a couple of weeks now, and she took care of Yoshino the other night. Karakura town was still blockaded off from the rest of Japan and the war was nearly won. Most of the country had been pushed towards Tokyo and it was only a matter of time before the coup de grace. Until then, stragglers had to be eliminated and the taking of Karakura town had to be accomplished. Right now, Cornelia was sitting in her office at a computer working with nightmare blueprints. She figured that if she was going to go out there, she wanted to have a better weapon, something that could give her an edge. She was improving upon her registered Glasgow and trying to run it with the programming to the Sutherland models that were going to be entering mass production soon. However, using some things she remembered Lelich saying when he was at the testing facility, she was going to try and push to make the nightmare blueprints he had helped suggest a reality. Cornelia figured it would be fitting if she saved him and Nunnally in the nightmare her half-brother had helped design, so to speak. She had alerted the engineering team days ago and an engine program of the Sutherland and Gloucester models had already been sent her way and the parts air-dropped a couple of days ago. Cornelia was constructing what would essentially become the first Gloucester nightmare frame and the greatest of its kind. Cornelia was no programmer, but she had a long-distance call-in with Schneeisel for assistance, whose mind worked better for these kinds of things. Members of the engineering department were also helpful to her. Cornelia had been slaving away at the computer for 3 days, though not through the nights without sleeping. She was designing the blueprints with the horn antenna cooling unit Lelich had suggested along with a color scheme to match her hair and a cape, purely for aesthetics. During her military training, Cornelia was most comfortable with an assault rifle, since shotguns were not available for Nightmare production at this time, so her Nightmare would sport one of those. She also wanted to create a bladed weapon and allow a hand-to-hand combat system for the unit. Cornelia had intended for the weapon to a sword, but changed her mind midway through. If this invisible warrior was anything like the people garbed in black, chances were he'd have a sword too. Given that Hollows, and these weird black-robed people, had ridiculous strength, she figured she might become easily destabilized if she used a sword and, therefore, went instead with a high-powered justing lance. Her reasoning was solid. The lance, as a stabbing weapon, could puncture right through her opponent's body. Since a Nightmare radiated with sakuradite, because of its fuel source, she only had to supply the assault rifle with the proper bullets and the hulking machine itself would take care of the rest. Therefore she could run her enemy through if she had the opportunity or swat him out of the sky with the blunt side of the lance and then rain down bullet hell upon her target. This would be a risky test. Either this would be the greatest creation of science Britannia had come up with, years ahead of its time, or it would be the biggest flop and Cornelia would be in hot water when she took to the field. Yes, Cornelia intended to take to the battlefield herself this time. She had 249 subordinates, more than 100 of them were Nightmare frame units, and Cornelia herself wanted in on that battlefield. The other soldiers were her snipers from last night and the rest of her infantry unit. Cornelia intended to use them as decoys to draw her enemy's attention. She'd watch him, observe his tactics, figure him out, and corner him. The engineering bureau told Cornelia that they could have her new Nightmare ready by the 10th. Cornelia had been pushing for the 9th, but she didn't have any luck. September 10th was the day that Charles had ordered the bombs to be dropped over Tokyo, to ultimately finish the war and end all resistance. She wanted a chance to rescue Lelich and Nunnally. She would not let them become a casualty of war. The Kurugi family had promised to return the prince and princess safe, but with the war going on, and the passing of the prime minister, how truthful that was seemed up in the air. 1 week, Cornelia thought to herself, in 1 week this will finally be over. Lelich, Nunnally, I will save you. September 10th. The day had arrived. Ichigo, however, had not appeared. Cornelia and her men made their way east. Maybe their final enemy had given up? There was no way of knowing. Cornelia moved in with caution. She was at the head of her unit. Sure, she stuck out like a sore thumb, but she was the best equipped to deal with the enemy, not to mention that any fact sphere could pick up her enemy's energy signature, but only she could see him. In reality, Ichigo still hadn't left the Urahara shop. He was deep in thought inside his inner world, training with Tensou Zanjutsu. The two were purposely clashing blades, trying to avoid cutting each other up so that Ichigo didn't go out into battle with a handicap. As they rushed, sidestepping around each other, while clashing blades, Ichigo and Tensou Zanjutsu drew away from each other and Ichigo panted a little before standing tall. He had been at this for days, taking breathers for a couple of hours, before acting again. He was trying to build stamina, reduce fatigue. Ichigo was running low on Ryutsu and he knew it. Midway through battle he figured he might have to revert to Shikai. His mind was made up though, he would commit to battle and he would drive Britannia out. Once he finished the surrounding enemy he could venture out and find food. Once he and his friends had food they could expand outwards and turn the tide in the war. Ichigo, Tensou Zanjutsu spoke to him. Yeah. Ichigo asked. Are you sure you've made the right decision? What do you mean? Ichigo was confused. You read Urahara Kisuke's note. You had the option to flee and protect yourself, to leave this world behind, but you didn't do it. Why? Ichigo looked to the side. Yuzo can't see spirits. She would be living in an empty world, not being able to see anything, not understanding anything. She and Karen are alive too. They're not part of this world. Ichigo looked at Tensou Zanjutsu, palmed cupped upwards and raised his voice. Japan is their home, not the Soul Society. I don't care if I could save the whole country and bring them to the Soul Society, it's not where they belong. Since when did you become a big hero? If I don't stand and fight, then who will? I have power, I can fight. Japan is losing, but my friends and I can turn this around. The war isn't lost. And for that alone you refuse to waver. Hi, Ichigo said, lowering his hand and speaking at normal volume. Then, while I do not agree with your decision, since you are firm in your resolve, I will support you. Wait, what do you mean you disagree with my decision? Ichigo asked Tensou Zanjitsu. A conversation for another time. Go, your friends are trying to speak with you. Ichigo was released from his inner world and now standing in the underground of Urahara's shop. His friends surrounded him as he sat down on the ground with Tensou Zanjitsu in his lap. He stood up. So, you're really going out there? Tatsuki asked him. I have to. But why are you all around me? Ichigo asked. Ishida-kun had some information for you. Orium exclaimed. Ichigo looked at Uriah, who pushed up his glasses. I've been using the communicator we grabbed and listening in on military code. Apparently the Brighton have someone here who is part of the royal family. They're referring to her as Colonel Lee Britannia and also calling her a princess. My English isn't fortified enough to understand more. But I think if you manage to kill her, we can make a comeback. Morale will be crushed. Do you know if she's the one attacking us? Ichigo asked. If I had to make a good guess, probably, Uriah told him. I see. Before the conversation could continue, all of the Nakama felt a surge of riots headed in their direction. What is that? Kigo blurted out. Tatsuki raised her palm towards the false sky. It feels like it's a little less than vice captain class, definitely senior officer. Why is such a strong riot headed in our direction? I don't know, but I'm going to find out, Ichigo said. What? But you have to fight Colonel Lee Britannia, the so-called goddess of victory, Uriah reminded him. I'm getting the feeling that they're one and the same, Ichigo stated and began to walk towards the ladder. As he marched, Orium followed. He stopped when he reached the ladder. Ichigo, she looked at him troubled. What's with that look? He asked, smiling. I'll be back. But Orium was still worried. What? What is it? Ichigo asked. Please don't end up like Yoshino, Orium told him. I know why it is you're fighting, but, it's so painful, Orium tensed up, tears splashed down from her face. I know this is important to you. I know you want to protect all of us, and Japan too, but, she looked him in the eye, tears free falling from her face, please don't die, please don't get hurt. Soma-san was painful, but, if we lost you, I don't know what I'd do. Ichigo took a deep breath. He'd been putting something off since getting to Urahara's. He figured now was as good a time as any to do it. This might be his last chance anyway. Uriah said Yoshino left here with no regrets, and her smile said she died as such. I should do the same. He put his hands on Orium's shoulders. I won't die. Ichigo firmly looked into her eyes with hard resolve. Orium, if we win this, he thought for a moment and changed his wording. No, when we win this, I want there to be something important between us. It's been so many years, but, Orium, I still love you. Orium let out a small gasp. I used to feel doubtful about our relationship, but no matter how many times I even glanced at another girl, all it made me do was long for you. I've missed you so much. Ichigo let go of Orium's shoulders and rubbed the back of his neck. And well, Ichigo bowed his head forward, tired of putting up with theatrics and nerves. Ugh, this is so difficult. He picked up his head and spoke confidently. Orium, let me just cut right to the point. Ichigo got down on his left knee, eliciting a surprised reaction from Orium. She didn't know if this meant what she thought it might. Ichigo then took out a box that bared within it a silver ring with octagonal rose-colored diamonds arranged in a way to create a strawberry. Orium gasped as she realized the implications. Marry me. Ichigo requested. His heart was pounding in his chest. He was a nervous wreck right now, but he had to know. He had to know if there was a future he was fighting for out there. If nothing else, that would be his motivation. Orium was speechless. She brought her fingers up to cover her shocked face. She had dreamed of a moment like this, a moment where her longtime crush, now boyfriend, would propose to her. She simply took a step forward and let her arms grab Ichigo's head and press his forehead into her stomach. I will. Ichigo rose to his feet and put the ring on Orium's finger. He stared down at the tinsel orbs he had come accustomed to looking into. He then pulled his fiancée towards him and embraced her tightly before Orium lifted up her head and the two shared a kiss. They felt the pulse of the senior officer-level Ryotsu. They knew this moment of happiness was fleeting. Ichigo turned to go, but Orium still held onto his arm. He stopped and she sidled up along him with her head into his back, very similar to their predicament 8 years ago when Ichigo was about to charge off into hell, quite literally that time. Promise me you'll come back. Ichigo did not look back at his fiancée. He merely looked forward through his mess of orange hair with a confident stare. I give you my word. I'll come back, even if I have to be dragged by my legs for you to pull me back from the brink of death. I didn't propose to you just now so I could die on the battlefield. I'll be out there, fighting for our future. What I've done right now is all the motivation and resolve that I need. I promise I won't leave you crying in front of a grave marker. Orium let go of him. The college graduate smiled at her fiancé. I will wait for you. No, don't, Ichigo said, surprising Orium, and took a step forward. If I don't make it back within 24 hours, start looking for me. There's no telling if I might be injured like Yoshino-san. If anyone should find me off in a ditch somewhere, it should be you. If something does happen though, if all this is for naught. Don't talk like that, Orium said punctually. Ichigo only now looked back at her. She seemed insulted by his last statement. She looked upset for a moment, but it faded slowly as she talked. Even if you disappear, even if you don't come back and I can't find you, I wasn't saying I wouldn't look for you. I was saying that no matter how long it takes, no matter how much heartache I have to suffer, I will wait for you to come back to me. She flashed her ring. That was the promise you just made to me. Overcome with emotion, Ichigo held Orium tightly once again, letting his vigorous hug tell her everything. Orium could feel it, his fear, his nerves, his doubts, all subconscious, and trying to be pushed to the side on the grounds that Ichigo was doing the right thing, that he wanted to come out of this alive, and was saying everything on the grounds that he would and was going to try, but didn't know if fate would deal him that hand. I'm not Superman. I won't go out there and say that I can protect everyone. I've never thought that since this started. My responsibility is heavy. I'm not going out there to try and liberate Japan or something crazy like that. I'm just one guy who stubbornly refuses to give up for his nation. I want Japan to realize that it's not over until it's over. If I can inspire that, then, even if I should perish, I will feel as if I have succeeded. You should have been writing poetry in your spare time, Orium giggled. Maybe so, Ichigo said. He let go of Orium and turned around. He paused for a moment. He was taking in his fiancée's appearance and let her do the same. He wanted them both to be able to remember the other's appearance for as long as they lived or existed. No matter what happens, our fates are intertwined. I love you. I love you too. The pulse of Senior Officer Ryotsu flashed again. Orium nodded to Ichigo. Ichigo nodded back and, with a single use of Shunpo, disappeared. He emerged on the surface, Tensou Zanjutsu in hand. The night Marrays were once again alerted by the radiation of his immense energy. The wreckage from the destruction the Brighton Neons had brought would end today, Ichigo decided. No more of his friends would get hurt. As the only stable defender left of his hometown, he would make one final stand against the overwhelming odds. By now Britannia had conquered almost all of Japan, except for this one town. Ichigo was not about to see his home demolished to ruins. Are you certain about this? Are you sure this is the fate you are destined for? Tensou Zanjutsu asked, his astral image appearing behind Ichigo's shoulder. Fate? Ichigo asked mockingly. If fate is a milestone, then we are the grist. There is nothing we can do. Ichigo gripped his blade tightly. So I wish for strength. If I cannot protect them from the wheel, his Ryotsu flared, then give me a strong blade. Ichigo lifted Tensou Zanjutsu towards the sky. And enough strength, He used a burst of Shunpo to reach a high vantage point, to shatter fate. To be continued. Chapter 150, Ichigo vs Cornelia, Ichigo's Last Stand. October 11, 2010 ATB. Ruins of Karakura Town. Two shadows appeared over a war-torn landscape that was Karakura Town. The owners of the shadows had been scouring all over the landscape for something, but had yet to find it. One of the shadows was taller than the other and had spiked hair like the shape of a pineapple. The other was shorter in stature with flat hair. Both were wearing similar clothes and carried swords. As they came upon a slab of concrete covered in blood, they saw something buried halfway into the dirt. The owner of the shorter shadow, a young woman, picked up the object. It was a pentagonal-shaped piece of wood attached to a small length of rope. "Is that?" the owner of the other taller shadow, a man, asked. The young woman responded with, "Well, I suppose this is proof enough." "Damn it." The man sighed, "Oh man, he is not going to be happy when he sees this." "I'm not right now." The man placed a hand on her shoulder. "Come on, Rukia, let's get this over with." "Yeah," Rukia nodded and followed the man, Renji, back to the Soul Society. "Ichigo, you damned idiot." 1 month ago. September 10th, Karakura Town, high noon. "If I don't try then there's no chance, but if I try, even if the odds are stacked against me, there is still a chance." Ichigo recited wise words of wisdom in his head from Lelouch, as he cleaved down another nightmare frame. With a grunt and a quick flick of his wrists, Ichigo sent a mid-powered Getsuga Tensho at the ground, destroying more infantry. Gunfire sounded from behind him, so Ichigo used Shunpo to move out of the way and, with a slash, cut one of the legs off before firing a Getsuga blast and destroying the frame entirely. Cornelia had Ichigo in her sights. She could see him clear as day. She knew she would be able to. She was hanging back, letting her fact sphere generate the imagery she needed. She was delaying entering the field of battle until absolutely necessary. Right now, she was simply observing Ichigo's tactics and trying to think of the best way to combat him. Unlike Yoshino, Ichigo was incredibly quick and still powerful enough to take down nightmare frames in a single swing. The moment he was targeted, he moved. It was like he could hear and sense the gunfire coming after him, as if he had a sixth sense that made him omnipresent to the world around him. As 5 nightmare rays surrounded Ichigo and rained bullet hell upon him, Cornelia watched as Ichigo cut all of the bullets away with fast sword action and deflected every blast into the other nightmare rays. Ichigo was looking for Cornelia, trying to sense the senior officer Ryutsuhi and his friends had sensed, but the Sakuradite interference was throwing him off. He also could see Cornelia, but didn't realize it was her, since her fact sphere was the only part of her nightmare that wasn't concealed by a large, partly damaged building she was hiding behind, waiting for a chance to charge forward and take to the battlefield. She was the commander. She had to direct the flow of battle and then make her move when appropriate. A sniper round blasted through the afternoon air, but Ichigo dodged it with ease. He watched the projectile whiz by and used physics to determine the slope and ascent of the bullet to find his assailant. He then fired a Getsuga blast to coat his ballpark range, obliterating the sniper. 2 Harkins went whizzing towards him. Ichigo cut the cord, grabbed the other one, pulled and flared his Ryutsu, causing the nightmare to explode just from the weight of it. Ichigo never felt more confident and less fatigued than he did now. He had been resting for days, building his stamina, and he refused to let himself be taken by the weakness of his body. Though he was not in top physical form, he had to fight with what little he had left. As he stood strong, Cornelia ran a quick numbers check. She was down to 25% of her units. It was a massacre. If things kept up like this, she'd lose for sure, but she had almost nailed Ichigo's tactics down to a T. She just needed a little bit more. "I need 2 men to act as bait," Cornelia said. Suicidal orders were necessary. Her troops understood that. No one questioned Cornelia when she gave an order. They knew she wouldn't ask them to play sacrifice if she had another option, and Cornelia never sacrificed her men unless absolutely necessary. She didn't like losing soldiers or making suicidal declarations, but there was no other choice against these types of foes. Cornelia gave directive orders to the 2 troops that responded in and gave them orders to draw Ichigo's sight. Cornelia was slowly learning Ichigo's mindset by watching him fight. He liked to move as little as possible and, as she predicted, he picked off her infantry first, obviously due to it involving less effort. On top of that, Ichigo seemed to attack only when a target was in sight. He was playing defense, which was understandable, given his position and everything she had learned about him up to this point. He wasn't trying to be flashy and always seemed to return to a good vantage point in the air when he could, as though he was trying to get an omnipresent feel of his surroundings, which, unbeknownst to her, he had for the most part. Ichigo cut down the two men Cornelia had asked for assistance and she called for fire on their corpses immediately in a wide spread. Ichigo was gone before the bullets reached him and the source of the fire was silenced. Cornelia was slowly realizing how useless and telltale gunfire was becoming. She needed just one more ploy to play and then she was confident the final showdown could begin. Ichigo didn't know why he had to constantly be using Bankai just to fight well. If he was at top form, all of the enemies should have been dead on day one. Anything he went near should have Komu's dead from just his Ryutsu alone, but something was holding him back. He was being weakened significantly, but he didn't know why. He knew Urahara said he would, but he didn't know that would actually happen and not by this much. Ichigo wasn't angry at Urahara or the Soul Society for not telling him. The Soul Society could not get involved in living world affairs, which Ichigo knew this was considered. Ichigo also knew that Lelouch had to be involved somehow, but wanted to save his country and then talk to the man with all the answers. As a group of Harkins barreled towards him from a multitude of directions, Ichigo dodged every last shot and then, moving quickly, sliced through them all before destroying all of the attached nightmare frames. I'm getting really tired of all this monotonous crap. How much of the army is left? And I think I've seen enough, Cornelia thought to herself and retracted her fact sphere sensor. Snipers in position, Nightmare rays provide cover fire only on my digital order. I'm going into battle. From behind the building she'd been using as cover all this time, Cornelia rushed forward to challenge Ichigo. This thing has worked fine in mobility. Let's see how it works in actual combat. And, Cornelia gripped her controls with renewed purpose, let's turn up the juice. Focusing her mind, and doing what she did to any weapon she picked up, Cornelia poured her spiritual power into the nightmare frame, fueling the engine with it. Based on her estimations, this would make it possible for her to fight on level with the black-clad swordsman. These estimations were correct, of course. With the Yggdrasil core combined with her Ryuryoku, Cornelia could easily coat the entire nightmare frame in her Ryutsu. Ichigo would have a much harder time piercing through her armor in his weakened state. Although his Bankai magnified his speed, his Ryutsu was dwindling considerably. Ichigo sensed Cornelia coming up behind him. Ah, here you are, he said with a smirk, you must be the goddess of victory we heard about. I've been waiting for you. Ichigo extended his blade out to her. Bring it on. Cornelia's Japanese wasn't the greatest, but she heard one phrase clear as day, goddess of victory. That was how she was known and, based on her opponent's tone, she felt the individual in front of her was challenging her to battle. These Japanese and their honor. Cornelia snarled. There is no honor in war, heretic. However, Cornelia smiled deviously, I can pretend to follow your rules. She extended her lance towards Ichigo as though accepting his challenge. So you do have some honor to you. Very well, Ichigo said aloud and flared his Ryutsu. I don't know how you're putting Ryutsu into that machine, but it doesn't matter. I'll cut you down. The battle began. Ichigo attacked Cornelia straight off with his sword, but Cornelia backed up and blocked with her lance. It wasn't the best defensive weapon, but the sheer size of it made it possible to block Ichigo with the spiritual pressure she was putting into it. When Ichigo began putting pressure on her, in an attempt to break her nightmare frame's arm, Cornelia gave a signal to a few soldiers and Harkins fired toward Ichigo and forced him away from Cornelia. She then opened fire on Ichigo using the assault rifle on her other arm. She didn't hit him a single time, but she was just satisfied to know it worked. Ichigo deflected every last one of her shots into the ground. Upon impact, they exploded, creating gigantic craters. He then attacked Cornelia again, going at her from different angles and trying to bring down the nightmare piece by piece. At one point he tried to break into the cockpit system, but Cornelia was quick enough on the controls to make him miss. After that miss, Cornelia panted a few times and strained her eyes. She was now utilizing her hyper-focus ability to fight Ichigo. She tapped a few keys and watched the bullets from snipers go at Ichigo to pull his attention away from her. She could see the trajectory and watched Ichigo dodge, using the array she had commanded to her advantage. This is the end game. You die. Cornelia shouted, and with a fierce swing she yanked back on the right arm's controls to pull her lance up and brought it down onto Ichigo's head as he was making to dodge the fifth bullet. However, Ichigo's reflexes were quicker than Cornelia had thought. He slashed the bullet coming at him, threw off Cornelia's trajectory, pushed her lance out of the way with his foot and made a beeline straight towards her. Cornelia switched to reverse movement immediately to put distance between her and Ichigo and called for cover fire from a nearby sniper, forcing Ichigo to abandon his assault, and Cornelia opened fire on him as he veered left. She maneuvered backwards around a corner and got behind Ichigo as he swatted away another sniper bullet. Ichigo then took out the two snipers and went back after Cornelia. This is bad, I thought I had him. I won't go down so easily. You're mine, Colonel Lee Britannia. Ichigo fired forward a Getsuga Tensho towards the nightmare frame, dealing significant damage as Cornelia was tossed about her cockpit. Thanks to their equal levels in power, the damage wasn't all that great thanks to the metal plating of the nightmare frame, but the thrashing could have been less painful. Cornelia opened with a spray of bullets. Ichigo stood still and hacked away at all of them. A few more nightmare frames came charging in an attempt to cut him down, but he blew them up. Cornelia was running out of troops and fast. She was closely reaching only about 10% unit strength. It was really irritating her. Worse, she was almost out of her hyper-focus state. She needed some way to get the better of her enemy. This is the end, Ichigo said as he held Tensou Zanjutsu into the air. Now it's over. However, in the middle of charging his Getsuga Tensho, his Bankai disengaged. He no longer had the Ryutsu to support it. He suddenly felt incredibly slow, and Cornelia sensed his energy drop considerably. Now's my chance. She sent a few snipers to distract Ichigo with their fire, but although he was able to hack them away, Cornelia thrust her lance forward and skewered Ichigo through the stomach on the tip of it before slinging him onto the ground. He was sent slamming into the ground and smashed into the pavement. Cornelia didn't wait for him to recover and opened fire. This is for my siblings. Cornelia shouted. She unleashed absolute hell on Ichigo. She unloaded her assault rifle, finger on the trigger, accuracy low, but output high, until her finger became numb. She got him though. She could see all the blood and watched as her enemy rolled off the side of raised slab of concrete onto lower ground. If he was breathing, he wasn't getting back up with those wounds. She panted and let the serenity of herself calm herself before radioing Meredith. All targets down. Good job, Colonel Lee Britannia, I expect you to. Cornelia instantly switched off the comm, revved up the engine and powered northeast. Meredith radioed back in, flabbergasted, Colonel, where do you think you're going? I'm going after the children of Lady Marianne. I didn't come here to fight, Major General, you made me do that. I came here to save my siblings. Cornelia lashed out. Colonel, you don't even know where they are. Turn around. The order was firm. Even her royal heritage was not enough to let Cornelia disobey orders wantonly. They were sent as political hostages to the Japanese Prime Minister's house. I know how to get to Tokyo. Leave me be. Cornelia shouted. Colonel, you're acting irrationally. This is not the behavior of a model soldier. COL-. Cornelia switched off her communication links. She didn't care if she lost her job or not, she would save Lelich and Nunnally. A car driving at 90 km per hour could make it to Tokyo between an hour and a half from her current location. Cornelia was determined to do it in less. Cornelia grabbed the motor controls to her nightmare frame and cranked up the speed to 130 km per hour. I will save you. I will save you. I will save you. Cornelia's mind chanted in her head over and over again as she drove her nightmare to the country's capital city. Her expression was determined, anxious, and panicked all at the same time. She was pushing the nightmare's systems into complete overdrive. I will save you. I will save you. I will save you. The words played over and over in Cornelia's head. She heard 2 helicopters flying overhead, behind her. Since Cornelia was not using her onboard communications, they had to radio her from high overhead. Colonel Lee Britannia, you are ordered to cease and desist immediately. Bombs are being dropped over Tokyo. You will be caught in the blast. Repeat, you will be caught in the blast. Cornelia ignored the warning. She cranked the speed of her nightmare up to 145. I can make it. I won't lose you. I will save you. Cornelia told herself. She overtook the helicopters and continued to drive towards Tokyo. Warning, systems at low power. Less than 20% battery efficiency remaining, Cornelia's onboard computer told her. Slower speed directly enforced. Override. Cornelia grit her teeth, almost muttering the word. Warning, power will go critical. Further propulsion of high-level speeds could result in permanent damage to system or an unconditional shutdown. A speed cap and velocity reduction must commence. Override. Cornelia shouted, glaring at the computer like a mad beast. Acknowledged, the artificial intelligence droned. Cornelia wrenched open a panel, and used it to activate her fact sphere to look up into the air. She could see the flight of planes that were carrying the bombs. In her head, she calculated an estimated time of arrival and drop-off of 10 to 20 minutes. She looked at her GPS. She didn't have nearly enough of that time. She punched the speed of her nightmare to 200 kilometers per hour. Red lights began flashing. The core cockpit began to heat up and Cornelia began to sweat under the intense temperature build-up. Warning, system overheating. Power cannot be sustained for longer than 10 minutes. The computer warned. I will only need 8. Cornelia continued to drive. Tokyo came up in sight. She slowed down to a safer 60 kilometers per hour as she neared. Power systems heavily depleted. 5 minutes of power remaining in stock at current speed. Cornelia took the information into account, and grabbed her transmitter from within the cockpit of her nightmare frame to talk to all who would listen. Tokyo was war-torn and desolate. Not a soul could be seen in sight. Lelich. Nunnally. She shouted into the transmitter. It's me. It's Cornelia. I'm here to save you. Please respond. If you're alive, come out where I can see you. Cornelia looked like she might cry if she wasn't given some form of sign that her siblings were okay. Lelich. Nunnally. I'm here to rescue you. Please, let me see you. Cornelia continued to drive until she heard the airplanes flying overhead. Somebody. They were close, but they'd have to get closer to her location and lower their altitude to accurately drop the bombs. Anybody. She realized she had to start making her way out of the city. Please. She continued to drive when she saw something right out of her main window. She zoomed in and was horrified. No. She looked up overhead. She had 3 minutes to get completely out of Tokyo, or she could well be caught in the explosions. The idea was to bomb Tokyo as a symbol of Japanese defeat. It was to be coward, but not destroyed. Knowing that, Cornelia had to make certain of what she was seeing in the time she had. She ejected from her nightmare, and ran towards the wreckage which contained what appeared to be a destroyed chess set. The pieces were chipped and damaged from the scuffle and battles that had been going on, scattered about by a destroyed makeshift home right nearby. She found the board, broken in half, not too far away. Please no. Please no. Please God, no. She flipped the board onto its back. To her horror, the board spelled exactly what she feared, Lelich's name written in script on the back in silver marker. Cornelia dropped to her knees, clutching the half of the broken board. Her half-brother was gone, and Nunnally with him. However overwhelming her grief was right now, she knew she would join them if she stayed. As much as appeal as the idea had, she knew Yuffie needed her. Cornelia took the broken half of the board with Lelich's name on it and picked up the nearest chess piece. It would be her memento of her siblings, that she would never forget them. The piece she had picked up, though scratched along the sides and chipped on the bottom, was the Black Queen. Cornelia got back in her nightmare and plotted a course out of the city. She reached the city limits and escaped. The bombs dropped half a minute later. She looked back at the explosion as the dust clouds formed and she watched the city burn. I'm sorry Lelich, Nunnally, I'm sorry I could not protect you. Cornelia thought as she looked on, mouth hanging open with tears dripping down her face. I'm sorry. Ichigo stared up at the sun floating overhead, shot to hell with so many bullets and holes in his body. Super soldier with a sword or not, he was still very mortal. Weak, Ichigo's eyes closed halfway. Did I fail? No, I couldn't have. Ichigo's body shook and more blood shot out. I have to get up, but I feel so weak. I want to get up, help, fight. Yuzo, Karen, Dad, I'm sorry. Orium, Ichigo thought of his fiancée he had just proposed to and how he might never get to see her smiling face again. If this is truly the end, then I don't regret having proposed to you. My heart is yours. Ichigo closed his eyes. Goodbye, Orium. Before slipping out, Ichigo made one last attempt to contact his Zanpakuto. Tensei Zanjutsu. He contacted his Bankai rather than Old Man Zanjutsu because he had a question for the younger-looking spirit. Yes, Ichigo? You said you disagreed with my decision to do this. Why? Because what I want to protect is not what you want to protect. It is the same reason Muramasa could not control me. From the very beginning, what I have wanted to protect is you, Ichigo. Ichigo could hear the sorrow in his Zanpakuto's voice. We both gave what we wanted to do our best shot. There is nothing to regret. And then, all too suddenly, the muscles in Ichigo's body went slack. The grip on his blade loosened and Ichigo let it fall to the ground. The wind blew across his body. He would not rise to fight Britannia again. Present day. Lelich was sitting with the substitute Soul Reaper badge on the table in front of him after Renji and Rukia had brought it to him. Everyone who knew Lelich was surprised when he abruptly left his chess game with Byakuya, strode to the backroom and didn't close the door. He just sat at the backroom table, staring at the piece of plywood, turning it over and looking at it constantly. Many of the members were standing a good distance away and had been watching him. He hasn't said a word since that thing arrived. Do you think he's okay? Renji commented. I should have been there. Rukia clenched her fist. I was always one of them. Friends or not, this was not your fight. I almost lost you once. I never would have let you walk into something like that, especially against regulations, Hisuna told her. Should we say something? Yuna asked. I don't know if there's anything we should say, Kyokaku stated. He didn't look this mesmerized or beat up even when you were dead. Leich Dano. Susanna said in worry. I didn't know they were so close. They didn't know each other that well, Rangiku stated, at least I don't think they did. He mentored him. I suppose that counts for something, Hitsugaya spoke up. There's more to it than that. No one knew Lelich had been listening or even heard all their chatter and they froze. Lelich still sat in the room, staring at the badge, turning it over as if he was trying to see every last cell in the carving. What do you mean, Lamperouge-sensei? Momo asked. There are two sides to every battle, always are. I thought I knew both, but, in the end, I only truly knew one side. He leaned back in his chair. What do you mean? I thought Ichigo and his friends were fighting Britannia, Naomi spoke up. They were, but not Britannia the country. They were fighting my sister, Cornelia Lee Britannia. The others were shocked at this declaration. Your sister? Isane asked. Almost all of you were on the Phantoms, you know my real name. I discarded that name when I died, because I always thought I was cast out, forgotten, but that was never the case. How do you know? Shisato asked. I'll tell you. July 17, 2010 ATB. 11th Prince, Leich VI Britannia, had been called from his makeshift house up the road to the Kururogi Manor. Suzaku had asked that he come by. There was a phone call waiting for him. Lelich, at first didn't want to speak to whoever was calling him. Suzaku had said that to the person on the other line, but they insisted that they speak to Lelich, saying it was important. Grudgingly, Lelich followed Suzaku back this time to answer the phone. Hello. He held the phone with both hands. Lelich. The 11th prince gasped when he heard the voice. See Cornelia. It's so good to hear your voice. Cornelia, why couldn't you protect my mother? You weren't there. My mother's dead. Lelich shouted into the phone. There isn't a thing you can say that I haven't already said to myself, but right now, that doesn't matter. Lelich, I promise you, I will tell you everything I can next time I see you. Tell me right now. Lelich exclaimed. I don't have that much time. I need to get back to training. But listen to me, Lelich, Cornelia spoke seriously, I will come for you. Just hang on for me, okay? Negotiations are failing, Britannia and Japan will soon be at war. I won't let the war take you though, I'll come find you. I will rescue you. Lelich could hear Cornelia's distraught tone on the other line. Lelich, please don't worry about a thing. I promise I'll be there. I promise. Present day. Lelich now had his hand over his eyes, his other arm lax at his side holding Ichigo's substitute Soul Reaper badge, but she never showed. I called her a liar, cursed her name, cursed my entire family, and said I had been betrayed. But she was there, she just didn't make it in time. She cared. Lelich, are you sure you're alright? Byakuya asked him. Lelich laughed a little, like he was losing a bit of his sanity. To be honest, I can't say. He stood up. He chucked the badge at Kyan, who caught it with ease. Give that back to your captain. Frame it. I want his name immortalized. But Lelich, I know what he caused, but that doesn't change what he's done for us. If you don't want to do that, then break the damn thing and bury it. Lelich walked past Kyan to leave. I don't care. Wait, Lelich, where are you going? Kyokaku asked. Back to my office, Lelich stated. Hisuna, Kaname, Toshiro, Yuna, Byakuya, could one of you put in a good word for me to Anohanasu Teiko and tell her I need some time off? I'll do it. Yuna stepped forward before the others could, but, why? I don't feel right, okay. I am, emotionally compromised. Rangiku, that means leadership defaults to you for now. Sir. Rangiku nodded. She felt as melancholy as all the others. No one had seen Lelich like this. The members of the Phantoms and Lelich's closest friends had seen almost every emotion come from Lelich: anger, jubilance, fear, confidence, crazy, frustration, devious, sorrow, regret, and blank. No one, however, had ever seen him depressed or broken. Even in prison he had been content. He had remained strong-willed, but now, it was like he was dying on the inside while doing everything he could to keep himself from screaming and looking foolish. It was only after he left that Susanna decided she had to follow him. His office door was closed when she arrived. She knocked 3 times before finding the door unlocked. Lelich's bedroom door was open, so she went in. She found him just sitting on his bed, deep in thought. Lelich Dano. Lelich didn't answer to the call of his name. Susanna sat down next to him and put her hand on his. Please talk to me. I'm here for you. You know you have me to talk to. Sometimes it's hard to do what you think is right. I had a choice, Susanna. What do you mean? My sister cared so much. I could have called her up, let her know I was alive after she promised to protect me, but I didn't do it. I cursed my family and I took vengeance. I spared no one. And now, with Ichigo gone, I only have to wonder, did I do the right thing? Was there a choice I had that would have let him live? You know my past, Susanna. You know of all the people I had to sacrifice, of all the things I had to do to get where I am today. All of it was necessary to make me who I am, and I don't regret it all. But now I sit here and I wonder, was it the right choice? Of course it was the right choice. You did the right thing at all times. You. No, I had one choice, several, in fact, to change things, to alter the course of history. I could have stopped all this bloodshed before it began. I had cards I didn't realize I could play. Given my knowledge, I worked with the hand I was dealt, but it was like there were still cards in front of me that I hadn't picked up into my hand. Worrying about it won't do you any good. I know, but it doesn't make things any simpler. That damned idiot, Lelich clenched his fists. He should have quit when he realized he was in danger. Lelich stood up and pounded his fist against the wall as he strode over to the window. What kind of idiot stays in his bankai for 30 days straight? Lelich's temper lowered. It's Jinjo Kyujo all over again, Susanna. Lelich Dono, please calm down. Lelich took a deep breath. Should I have warned him? Should I have taken the risk? You did what you thought was right, why doubt yourself? I know that there are sacrifices we all have to make, but I'm tired of making sacrifices. When will I finally be able to stop suffering and causing suffering for others? You are Zero, the man who creates worlds and the man who destroys them, Susanna said, standing up. Lelich looked at her. You did it for the world. You did everything you could. I feel like I should have been able to do more. We are all imperfect. I'm sure all of us wish Ichigo would have been smarter and not gone and died. But I was the one who made the decision to limit his power. I was the one who decided to keep him in the dark. You did it to preserve history. How much more to history do I not know? What else will I have to suffer? Lelich tensed. Susanna hugged Lelich from behind with a smile on her face. Whatever you suffer, you won't suffer it alone anymore. I am with you, Lelich, and I always will be. No matter what, you will always have me. Susanna, Lelich, and his wife kissed. A memorial service was held in the Soul Society for Ichigo's death. Contact could not be made with the Nakama of the substitute Soul Reaper, and his body, nor his Zanpakuto, was recovered, so it wasn't as complete as it could have been. After the service, some of the Godi I-13 came up to pay their respects. It started with Kenpeki. It was the first time anyone had seen the 11th Division Captain Melancholy. Now why do you have to go and do this, you stupid idiot? You had so much to live for. You could have been my successor. Ichi, Yachiro said, frowning at the memorial stone with the substitute badge attached to it. Kenpeki sighed, come on Yachiro, let's get going before this really starts to get sappy. So iPhone was the next to visit Ichigo's memorial stone. I should have told you about this. I should have told you that I suspected something like this. Ichigo, how did I fail you as a teacher? What could I have done to make you be here today? So iPhone couldn't think of anything, and then she walked back towards Yuriuki, who hugged her. You ready to go back? Yeah, so iPhone nodded. The two women walked away together. Kyan, Kyokaku, Kendra, Stefan, Yuna, Yukatake, and Senna all paid their individual respects to Ichigo. Hisuna, Byakuya, and Rukia were the last three. He was a fool to think that he could take on an entire empire by himself. How can you speak so ill of the dead? Rukia bit back. Byakuya-sama, why don't we give my sister some space? We can have our own discussion back home about this. I suppose that's true. Byakuya and Hisuna left. The clan leader looked over his shoulder at his sister-in-law, wondering if there was something he could say. He understood what it was like to lose someone you cared for deeply. He thought he might be able to help her ease the pain, but he decided that there was not much he really could say. Rukia stood in front of Ichigo's grave with a downcast look. When did I teach you this? She said solemnly. What part of any of what you were taught made what you did seem like a good idea? She tensed up, and soon she realized she was crying. Why did you do it? Why did you fight Britannia when you knew it was hopeless? Yukatake Teiko would have helped you live. Why did you choose to fight? I should have been there. Rukia balled her fists as she stood, eyes closed, with tears flowing down her face. I should have been there to guide you. I don't care what Nasan says. You're too stupid to realize a lost cause. You always have to rush headlong into danger without any care for your own existence, and look where it's gotten you. She spoke bitterly. You damned fool. I was your friend. No matter what the Soul Society's opinion on this was, I should have been there. You needed me. In your hour of need I wasn't there. Rukia dropped to her knees and put her hand on the tombstone. I don't care what Lamperouge-sensei says. Tears splashed the tombstone. I'm the one who killed you. I created what you were. You are my responsibility. Ichigo, why? Just why? The rain began to come down. Rukia stayed in front of the grave for who knows how long, but when she finally decided to return home she was thoroughly soaked. Kyan answered the door when she arrived and brought her soggy body into his strong arms. There was nothing he could say, nothing he should say. Ichigo meant a lot to Rukia. Perhaps it was because they had known each other much longer, but Kyan began to wonder why it was Rukia chose him and not Ichigo. He held a special place in her heart. Rukia wouldn't have been hard on Ichigo if she didn't care. She wouldn't have yelled at him or called him an idiot if she didn't care. Kyan knew just how much Rukia wanted to go to the world of the living, but was stopped by red tape and several of the captains. Hisuna had watched her like a hawk to keep Rukia from running off to the world of the living on her own. After drying her off and after she had calmed down, Kyan and Rukia sat down in one of the gardens with Rukia laying her head against Kyan's shoulder while he had his arm wrapped around her, hand on her head. "Do you regret it at all?" Kyan asked as he and Rukia looked at the stars. "I do," she said bitterly. "You shouldn't." "Why not?" "You changed his destiny, but he made the choice to fight Britannia. You had no control over him. I still should have been there." "And done what?" "Told him to stop, that fighting Britannia wasn't worth it." "Do you honestly think he would have listened?" "There might have been a chance that he could have turned his blade on you to protect his home. He would have marked us as his enemies if we got involved. He understood that we cannot interfere in living world affairs. If we suddenly got involved and opposed him, he would resent us. We would be taking away his right to choose. I still feel there was something I could have done. Honor him." "What?" "Honor his memory. Remember him for how he helped the Soul Society and how he was a benefit to us all. I'm still going to miss him." "And so will I." Kyan pushed Rukia closer to him. "Of course, if you feel terrible, imagine how Asahine must feel. No parent should have to outlive their child." "That's a good point. It doesn't make it hurt any less, though." "I know, but I'm right here. Just like you helped ease my pain when Miyako died, I'm here to ease yours." "Arigato, Kyan Dano." "Silly, you don't have to thank me." Kyan had some sake brought out into the garden and he and Rukia looked up at the sky into the stars. "To Ichigo. To Ichigo." They swallowed the sake and spent the night out in the garden as they remembered the brave, if but foolish, substitute Soul Reaper. End of chapter 150. Check the description for the links to the author.